So I want to remind the public that this meeting is going to be viewed on the live stream at www.longmontcolorado.gov. Anyone wishing to speak at first call, public invited to be heard, will need to add his or her name to the list outside the council chambers. Only those on the list will be invited to speak at the first public invited to be heard. Speakers who do not place their names on the list will have the opportunity to speak during public hearing items this evening or at the final call, public invited to be heard, any item at that time at the end of the meeting. Can we have approval of the minutes, the November 8th, 2021 organizational meeting minutes? Thank you. It's been moved by Councilor Waters and Mayor Pro Tem, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Rodriguez. Let's vote.
And just waiting for Councilmember Martin. Did you vote yes? Absolutely. There you go.
Thank you. That has carried. That vote is carried. Let's see, where are we? We also need to approve the minutes for the regular session on November 9th, 2021. Can I have a motion? Thank you. Again, it has been moved by Councilor Waters and seconded by Councilwoman Hidalgo-Faring. Let's vote.
I got Marcia.
Okay, you got it. Again, that is carried 6 to 1. 6 to nothing. It passed. Hooray. So I am going to make an agenda revision and put the city manager's report on COVID-19 next, and then the agenda revisions after that. Yep. So Harold, are you ready for the update?
Ready.
Thank you.
Thanks. So Mayor, Council, this is obviously the presentation that we received from Boulder County and with the notes for us to present. We did have the administrators meeting today and got some additional information. So if you look at where we are right now, we are seeing a decrease in the number of cases and the cumulative case rate per 100,000. What's interesting is when you look at the numbers across the board in the counties, you can still see that we're all still in the high transmission rate. Boulder County is at 211.84. We are seeing some fairly consistent reductions in the numbers at this point. It didn't look exactly this way last week, and so we're going to continue to watch this. In the briefing that we received today from Boulder County Public Health, I think they were cautiously optimistic in terms of what they were seeing in the numbers, simply because we have sort of seen this ping-ponging back and forth as we continue to move forward. When they look at the case trend by age group, you can see that the 0 to 11 category probably had the most significant drop. What they're not sure about, and part of what they talked about in the meeting today, is how much did this really come into bear because of the Thanksgiving holiday and what we were seeing. We are also seeing the 35 to 44-year-old group has show a small uptick, and so they're going to be, continue to watch that. When we look at the case breakdown by race and ethnicity, and we're seeing that become more in line with the county population. Again, remind you when we were looking at the numbers before, when we were seeing that 21%, part of it was because of the caseloads that we were seeing in Longmont, and the fact that our demographics look different than the county in terms of our Latinx population. Some good news for Longmont, so we're no longer 40% of the cases, getting closer to that 30% mark, and we are seeing more even distribution across the county. But we still have, we're still ahead of Boulder when we look at it on a per capita basis. What they're seeing from the health system, and so that you can see on the top, the average number of hospitalized confirmed patients, it increased by 2% in the week ending on the 28th in the North Central region. We're at 5% in terms of staffed ICU bed availability. 6% and the med-surg availability moved a point, but still holding steady. What's really interesting is when you see we had some improvement on the tight staffing numbers, but not much, 3%, and there's still 18 pediatric confirmed cases in Colorado. When we look at the hospitalizations in Boulder County, we had 90 people hospitalized with confirmed COVID, and we currently have 12 staffed ICU beds available. I think last week that was like at 3 available beds when I looked at the data last week. We're still exceeding the epi capacity of Boulder County in terms of what they can really trace. Again, wanting to remind everyone that they really are triaging that when they see cases and really focusing their efforts on those areas where you have a higher level of issues that you need to be aware of. This is the wastewater numbers that we've been looking, and I don't know what my computer did this time, but it changed the colors and everything else. But generally, the piece on this that we're seeing is you saw where we had a recent spike and then we're going down. Like Boulder County, when we look at the actual case numbers, we're hopeful that this continues. But the point that I really wanted to make in this slide is if you look at where we are, where we've been lower in the last few weeks, and you look at how that really relates out here, you know, we're still higher than we've been historically on our wastewater numbers. This really is the only leading indicator that we can see, and you can see the yellow or the greenish lines are actually the actual case numbers that we've seen. So we can see how that's really trending with the wastewater work that we're doing. So based on what we're seeing now and the leading indicator and the predictions that we're using, it's probably going to look a little flat next week. And our folks have been getting remarkably close. So they actually have a prediction table. And they've been getting pretty close in terms of the actual numbers of reported cases and what they're seeing in the data. The big difference on this is if you look at the number of cases versus the wastewater loading and the number of reported cases before, you can definitely see a difference even when we had higher wastewater loading numbers. I do want to say that our lab staff did reach out to the state, and the state is working on a way to test the wastewater for the Omicron variant. And we've also reached out to GT Molecular that we're working with, and they're trying to do that now. So obviously not ready, but everybody's starting to work on that so we can see what's in the wastewater. The big information that really came out of the presentation today is when we really look at the deaths that we've had recently. And obviously you can see that the majority of them are not associated with long-term care facilities. The information that they talked about is when you look at this number in terms of the deaths that occurred, the majority of them are unvaccinated individuals. And for those individuals that were vaccinated, almost to a T, they were all over the age of 80. And so obviously we're seeing you know, older adults probably also have other conditions that are coming into play. And then the other point that we're seeing in this is they also didn't go to the doctors right away. And so we're seeing that come into play. Some, I think they said, didn't at all. So they're really watching that number, but it's definitely higher than we've seen in a while. Here's where some things, Eugene and I were talking about this earlier. So we look at our positivity rate, and it's 7%. Obviously not tracking with what we're seeing in terms of the case numbers. So I'm going to ask them to see if we can actually see the number of test runs, because this is really starting to look to me like we're just having fewer tests. And so it's driving the positivity rate up when we also look at the fact that the number of cases are going down. So we have to work and really try to get some more data to answer that question. Been relatively stagnant in terms of the percent of total population that's been vaccinated and percent of eligible population. And then this is what it looks like in terms of those individuals that have received their booster dose. Obviously there's going to be a pretty hefty public information campaign in that 70+ category in terms of getting that booster dose. based on what we're seeing in terms of the breakthrough cases and those that get more severe where they're hospitalized in the ICU and other areas. You have some data resources. Here's the slide that they basically put on the Omicron variant and what they're seeing. Generally, they're saying, again, what we're seeing on hearing on the news, it's an area of concern. They're saying it spreads quickly, but it'll be a couple of weeks before they really understand the disease severity and whether or not there's any resistance. What they did point out in the conversation with us is there is some preliminary evidence that suggests that there is an increased risk of reinfection in this. And what they really talked to us about is while the travel restrictions are slow, they'll slow transmission, it ultimately won't prevent the spread of it. And I guess the state emergency manager was on Face the Nation or one of the television shows on Sunday, and he stated that it hasn't been detected in Colorado, but it's probably here. And so I get that's why they're working on some of the other components. Generally responding to it, what the county health department said, it's really we don't change what we're doing. We just continue what we're doing, and we're more vigilant. And obviously they talked about encouraging people to continue to get vaccinated. And then this was an interesting slide for all of us. When you really look at where are the cases developing in different settings. And so obviously you can see that 40% of the cases in Colorado have been associated with school outbreaks. There's a distinct difference in this. When you look at, when you compare Larimer and Jefferson and some of the other counties on this slide with Boulder County, which is at 108 versus 915, 600 to 900 cases in these other counties. And I guess Pagosa Springs, they've moved to all remote learning based on the cases. But then when you look at this, it's really interesting because schools are the highest, jails are second, and what's really interesting is in this, I think all counties are struggling with this in their jails. Then you can see the healthcare and the skilled and assisted living, and then office indoor, and then college, and so on and so forth in terms of where they're seeing those cases develop. They talked to us about flu. Again, they wanted me to remind you all and obviously everyone else that's watching this in terms of the impact that flu's having on the system. We've had 5 hospitalizations in Boulder County within the last week, and really just again talking about the need for the flu vaccine as well, because that also places a strain on our health system. And then when they talked about other key issues, there's less than 700 beds available in Colorado. That's probably changed by this evening from when we got this report. There's 12 ICU beds in Boulder County, and they're really watching the development of the Pfizer pill to reduce hospitalization and death. I guess they're reporting up to 85%. The key takeaway on this one is in order for that to work, you actually have to have the testing capacity in place for people to utilize it, and you have to have people test. In terms of what's happening around us, I know council's had this question. So obviously Pitkin and Larimer, they adopted a similar public health order that we had in Boulder County, although Larimer did not include the vaccine verification program. Then the last week, Jefferson, Adams, Arapahoe, and Denver all adopted the Boulder County Public Health Order. Broomfield is only requiring masks in government buildings, but they're going to meet next week to reconsider this. And then the Metro Denver Public Health Group, they're working to launch a regional collaboration on the voluntary vaccination program that we've been in for a while here. So there's a lot of movement in the various public health agencies. And that's my presentation. I'll be happy to try to answer any questions. Obviously, I can send those to Camille and Lexi, and we can get you all more information.
I don't see anybody in the queue. Do we have any questions from council?
There was one slide that I had a question on, and I totally, so I'll email it
Okay.
later.
Okay, thank you, Harold. Seeing none, we'll move on. The reason that I flipped the agenda revisions and submission of documents, which should have come before the COVID report, is because a couple of sessions ago, we discussed whether council should stay in-person meetings or go virtual. So this is the time after this report that I think that we should just have that discussion. But I would like to remind council that if we do go virtually, we'll have to give direction to staff to bring back an amendment to our rules and meeting policies to allow for virtual meetings, because this is not a declared emergency, which it was when we first went virtual. So does anybody want to make a motion here to open up this discussion?
So I would like to move to
Can-
open, oh, I move to open discussion.
Okay, did it-
So, is it ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so yeah, so I'd like to make a motion to move to open discussion on whether or not we should be moving to virtual or, and change, I guess, our original
Or in person.
stance. Yeah, or in person.
Do I have a second? Okay, that has been moved by Councilwoman Hidalgo-Faring and seconded by Councilwoman Yarbrough. Do we have a discussion? Anybody? Don't we have the discussion? Okay, let's vote. All those in favor, or let's just vote. Okay, that vote carried with Mayor Pro Tem Rodriguez against. So is there any discussion? Anyone?
I believe this just goes on to the next agenda.
No.
Well, this isn't where we would normally have that discussion.
Well-
Unless a different motion is made.
Yeah, I guess you,
have a discussion
not to move it to the next agenda, but to have the discussion now.
now. That's what I had moved for. Have a discussion whether or not to go virtual.
Councilwoman Martin.
Yes, assuming that this is in order, and I'm not sure either. But I have one question to ask the staff, and I'm not sure who it would be. I would think it would be Susan Wallach, but I don't see her in. The question is, if we change the rules so that a virtual participation is allowed under the current context, is that the main staff burden on this? Because we already have all the processes worked out, right? Everybody knows how to run virtual Zoom meetings really well by now. So, or at least that's what I think, and I'd like to have that confirmed. Sandy?
Mayor Peck, Councilmember Martin, Sandy Cedar, Assistant City Manager. So we've been testing all sorts of different options down here in the council chambers. If you chose to go back to just straight virtual, then we do add a staff member to this process, but we've actually hired somebody to help us with these virtual meetings because we think they're probably not ending quickly and maybe shouldn't end quickly. So we do have someone who can assist with that at this point. So you certainly could go virtual, and we are staffed and ready for that.
Okay, thank you. And, yeah, that's all I have.
Before I call on Councilman Waters, I would like to explain that the only time, the purpose for making a direction to staff is if, in fact, we go virtual. Then we would direct staff. Right now, this is just a discussion, and if we vote to go virtual. I should have explained that sooner, but this isn't a direction to staff at this moment. Councilman Waters. Are you not?
Thank you, Mayor Peck. Let me just start by asking, maybe it's a question for you, it's a question for the council, maybe it's a question for staff. Saturday, we're going to interview candidates for board and commission appointments. We're going to do that virtually, yeah.
Correct.
Why are we doing that virtually as opposed to in person? Because we've done that one time virtually when we were meeting virtually. Otherwise, we've always met in person.
Correct.
This Saturday, we're going to do it virtually. Why is that?
Can you answer that, Sandy? Or
Mayor Peck, Councilmember Waters, I believe it was way more efficient for both the applicants and for the city council, but of course I would defer to city clerk to add any comments to that.
Mayor Peck, that's exactly what our assumption was, is that that was more efficient, definitely for applicants, but also for you all.
Had nothing to do with health and safety.
In addition, the consideration of.
Because I asked this question weeks ago. I asked it of you, why are we doing this? And one of the reasons was for health and safety.
Absolutely, and not knowing where things would be on December 4th, we
Well,
opted
this
for
was weeks
virtual.
ago. If it was for health and safety, I just, if we, in the interest of our health and the health and safety of applicants, we're meeting virtually on Saturday. Why in the world would we continue to do this and bring ourselves together if one of the priorities for applicants and for us on Saturday is health and safety, and then we just do the reverse and continue to do the reverse in spite of the data? So my comment is, you know, for months I've said I thought we were making a mistake. When I look at when we talked about this back in whenever it was, May or June, and the discussion was about the example we want to set, and part of that discussion was setting the example for what happens in schools, as I recall. And when I see 40% of the cases right now can be tracked, is that the data we saw? 40% of the outbreak can be tracked back to infections in schools. That's where they start. I said then I thought we were setting the wrong example then. I think we continue to set the wrong example now. And I think we ought to give direction to staff to bring changes to our rules and procedures and go back to virtual meetings until we, especially with a new variant coming along, that there are so many questions about and so much concern about. So, but I'm on the record with that. My position hasn't changed, but you asked for comments, and I just want to let you know where I still sit on this.
And we are having this discussion because at the last council meeting, I said we would have the decision on the November 30th meeting. So that's what we're doing. Councilwoman Hidalgo-Ferring.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. So in comment, so just to make a quick comment, you know, back in June, I guess I was feeling more optimistic and hopeful that we were getting a handle on COVID, that we were going to be able to kind of mitigate and keep things under control. The message I got when we met last Friday that kind of made me lean a little more towards heading towards virtual was that if we can still conduct, if any entity can still conduct business virtually, then go that route. There are some places that you cannot. Businesses, school, it was a nightmare. And yes, I see a lot of infection rate on there. But I mean, I tell you, this year, in my 28 years of teaching, this year has got to be the single most challenging year. And a lot of it is just picking up the slack from trying to teach online. And so if there are things that we can be doing organizationally, or things that we, you know, companies, businesses that can meet online, let's do it. And so that way we can still have groups, organizations, businesses that need to stay open, stay open. But actually I had a question for Sandy, was, or Assistant City Manager Cedar, was about the hybrid. Where are we, you know, how has that progress been going on possible hybrid option?
So Mayor Peck, Councilmember Hidalgo-Ferring, there's kind of some different levels. So when you talk about a hybrid meeting, there's some different levels of hybrid meeting.
Yes.
You know, obviously staff prefers either fully in person or fully virtual, but I certainly understand that there are some, you know, reasons to be able to do both. If you decided that you were just going to have public invited to be heard as a hybrid option, right, where people could call in. We did this back in June. By the way,
Okay.
the cases were much, much lower in June and July.
Yes.
Than we're seeing today. But during that period of time, we did continue to keep public invited to be heard open as a virtual option as well as in person. That's kind of level one, right? So that you could allow public comment if you wanted to virtually. Level two of a hybrid would be also allowing staff presentations or Boulder County presentations, those kinds of things. And I do think that we've now figured out, thanks to one of our wonderful ETS folks, how we can actually make that happen so that you can hear them and more importantly, they could hear you. That was the issue we were having.
Okay.
And then the final sort of version of that would be is if any of you needed to participate remotely and not here. So that requires yet another level of equipment and some setup. But we do think that we could do any of those three levels depending on how you wanted to move forward.
Okay, and thank you. That was more for my curiosity. I'm not saying that we should move in that direction tonight, or I just wanted to kind of check and see where we all were. Thank you.
Okay, I don't see anybody else in the queue, so it looks like we need two motions. I need a motion to either go hybrid, virtual, or stay in person. Then the second motion I need then is to direct staff to, let's see what it is, to bring back an amendment to our rules and meeting policies to allow for the virtual or hybrid meeting. So that's a lot. Does anyone want to make a motion?
Thank you, Mayor Peck. I move that we return to fully virtual meetings for both the council and the public comment.
Second.
Okay, that motion was made by Councilwoman Martin and seconded by Councilman Waters to go virtual. So can we have a vote? I am going to make the statement that I'm going to be the tiebreaker, because if this is a tie vote with 3-3, we will no longer be able to discuss this on council. It'll be a dead issue. So we always need to be able to bring this up. So I only. This is not without the option of hybrid. Right. So I can't see the vote to know how. Okay. So that carries 5-1 with Mayor Pro Tem Aaron Rodriguez as a negative vote. Now our second motion has to be to, so I'll make this motion. I move to direct staff to bring back an amendment to our rules and meeting policies to allow for virtual meetings.
I'll second.
All right, let's vote. So Dawn, can you tell us when that next meeting will be? I know we have a few.
Mayor, your next meeting is December 7th.
So we'll start virtual December 7th.
Is that a question for Eugene? Do we need the policy before going virtual, or can they do that simultaneously?
You know, I think in this circumstance where it's health and safety related, that if council wants to go virtual, we could do it next meeting and introduce the policy at that meeting.
Thank you. So now that we've gotten through that part, are there any other council members that want to add something to a future agenda? Not seeing anything? Yes? Yes. Okay. Councilwoman Hidalgo Faring.
Jump out or just push the button. Thank you, Mayor. So, I'd like to direct staff to actually come up with, to bring us back some options for the creation of either a formal program, a task force. I'll kind of leave it up to staff to determine what the best avenue is. But really, it's to address the need for entry-level market rate for sale housing that, what we've called mid-tier. I don't know what if it's attainable housing, but what is the language that is used according to HUD or, governmental entities. But I do want to start making some really concrete actions in finding, addressing our housing crisis, especially for that working class, middle tier group. Some of the things that I would like staff to look at is what's the best available data. So this group or program would really delve deep into looking what data is specific to Longmont, what would be developed, what the goal council should undertake in addressing attainable housing and securing and addressing the housing crisis. And this program should be designed in setting goals for the number of housing units that we need to build over the next 10 years. Okay, so we know that there's a need. We've done a lot, I think, with Longmont Housing Authority in meeting people, below that poverty line. But I really want to start focusing more on what we can do to help our entry-level home buyers, working class folks. I see this in my realm. I rent a house. I can't afford to live here. And I have a good relationship with our landlord, and I think that's the only reason why, I'm able to stay. Yes, go ahead.
Can I just interrupt?
Yes.
So can you refine that motion?
Yes. So I would like to, I'm sorry, I'm just carrying on. It was something very passionate for me. So I would like to move to direct staff to bring back some options to council in the creation of either a formal program or task force to address the need for entry-level market rate for sale housing in Longmont. So they would come back with, and so their task would be to set goals that, you make recommendations for what goals we should be setting and data collection that is specific to Longmont. I'm trying to shorten it.
So
'Cause I
the
have a lot.
motion is to direct staff to have a committee to address middle tier housing. Is that it, basically?
Yeah, yes,
Okay.
yes.
Do we have a second?
Mayor Peck, I would like the second, but I have a comment.
Okay. Oops, try again. Can you
Thank
second
Mayor
it
Peck.
first?
Yes, I will second it, and I would like to offer a friendly amendment because I know that there is work underway regarding some of the things that would be incentives, such as amendments to the land use codes, time of incurring, certain fees and so on, that I really don't want to lose track of. So I would just like to include a clause that says, as a continuation of the work that is already in progress regarding high-density land use.
Exactly. I'd accept that as a friendly amendment. I don't want to lose what we have in progress, but I want the creation of this to be complementary and just kind of help move that work along.
Okay, great.
So-
Does somebody have to second the amendment?
If I accept it as friendly, I don't think so. We're okay?
Councilman Waters?
Thanks, Mayor Peck. I don't know if this is a question for Councilmember Hidalgo Faring. The current ordinance, our current inclusionary housing ordinance includes the language about mid-tier housing with the price, with a range of price points, right, potential price points, that makes it mid-tier housing. that was specifically added with that range established to address, to send a signal that we need mid-tier housing. We need attainable housing. That was the language we used. And we labeled mid-tier in the ordinance itself. So I'm just wondering where we're going to end up. Not, and I support any group. We've got Prosper Longmont here tonight to lean in, to weigh in on this. But I'm a little concerned that we have an ordinance with language already in it. We haven't done enough, in my opinion, and maybe it's amending that ordinance, or maybe it's pulling that out and creating a new ordinance. I'm not certain what the right approach is, but we do have it. We have it codified right now. One of the big, in fact, what was in the queue weeks ago, as I looked at what was coming in terms of agenda items, we were to have had on the agenda tonight a return to the discussion of the unresolved issues in the inclusionary housing ordinance, one of which was mid-tier housing. That was going to be the topic for tonight, and it came off the agenda for, I'm certain, all the right reasons. There's a bunch on tonight's agenda anyway. But I'm just a little concerned about having an ordinance and a group that goes to work on something that's going to be maybe aligned or maybe not with an ordinance, and how confused that might end up getting us. If the recommendation here, or the direction of staff, is to bring us amendments to the ordinance, to the exclusionary housing ordinance, and ways to increase the likelihood that we see more mid-tier housing, and to set a target. I've always believed that we've fallen short, that we didn't set a target like we did for affordable housing. But I'm just concerned about getting at cross purposes or confusing the fact that we already have an ordinance. We're in the queue to bring back that part of the ordinance and the calculus of what does qualify for mid-tier housing, and where we would end up potentially with less rather than more clarity. That's the concern.
Can I break into this for just a second? Councilman Waters, I think that the motion is not for an ordinance. It's just for the committee to discuss ways to get to what our inclusionary zoning ordinance says. And do we need amendments to it? Absolutely. But that's a different motion from my perspective. I think this is, correct me if I'm wrong, I was confused about the two discussions. Do you want to speak to what?
I can, or Councilmember Rodriguez, maybe he might have better.
Mayor Pro Tem Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mayor Peck. So I think one thing we have to look at least what I'm hoping for would come to fruition with a potential working group that would be addressing this, is that there was a point in time where the city did a study, or a study was provided at some point, where we didn't have enough apartments being built in our community. And so there was a concerted effort to add more apartment homes to our residential portfolio. We also, were involved with determining housing affordability, and that we had this 12% mark, and that equated to 2,100 units or something. So there again was enumerated what our deficit was. And so that's, I think, what I'm really hoping for is a pointed look to establish what the deficit is. And anecdotally, because of what I do for a living, I would imagine that we're falling very short in, say, condominium properties, for instance, as well as more townhome style and paired home style properties. That's just anecdotally what I'm seeing. But to have an actual number set on there would, I think, help us more in either augmenting our current standing ordinance and policies, or not, depending on if that really isn't the case, and that we have to look at a different place. So that's what I would really hope from the working group, if it were to be established, is that we're able to finally come up with some concrete numbers for the kind of housing that we need to possibly augment our ordinance and policies to encourage more, rather than just say a number spectrum there. We might be able to come up with some other ideas to, perfect, not that it'll ever be perfect, but do much improved basis to something that really there's been some movement on, but not as much as I think we all hoped when we enacted it, a few years ago. So that's just my take on it.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, so those, I echo, those are my hopes and expectations as we create this task force or committee. What I really, and then I'm also looking at the document that we received from ECHO with recommendations, and some of the things that I was reading on there, and really looking at our planning, the planning process, looking for systemic bias, having people who are a part of this task force who could really identify those biases that are currently happening within our systems and our practices, so, and to add that particular input. So my hope is that this task force can really pinpoint specifically toward Longmont what the number of housing we need, the types of housing we need, what, now that we have ARPA money coming our way, how can we best utilize that, make recommendations for, I know it's a hefty group, but if we can get a group of just very experienced individuals to be a part of this and who have the time and the expertise to really understand the data, that we can start making headway in addressing what we're lacking in our community.
Councilwoman Martin.
Thank you, Mayor Peck. This is really just to clarify, is this task force intended to be a staff task force, or is this to be a task force comprised of staff, council members, and community members, as was the task force that met when we were designing the first affordable housing ordinance? What's the vision for it?
Got it. Is it in there? Perfect. Thank you. So, really, I wanted to bring this, I wanted to have staff create a couple of options. What would it look like if it didn't encompass everybody? If we have too many individuals, staff, council, community, would it be as productive? Or would it be better met if we had community input via survey or community outreach? So really, I kind of want to throw it, and I'm sorry, to throw it back to staff based on your expertise and your experience in these types of task force. What would be the best route for us to take? Sorry for throwing it back at you, but I really want to be open as to what that might look like.
Okay, it doesn't look like there's anybody else in the queue to discuss this, so let me reiterate what that motion was. It is a direction to staff to create a task force / committee to look at mid-tier housing funding and et cetera. Options. Good word. So let's vote. It's been made and seconded. Let's vote. So that vote carried 6-0.
Mayor, I hate to interrupt. We're having some sort of technical problem showing the vote, so thanks for reading it out. We'll see if we can troubleshoot it at the break.
Okay, great. All right, next on our agenda is a special report presentation on air quality and oil and gas updates. And Dr. Jane Turner is going to introduce this update item.
Good evening, Mayor Peck, members of City Council. My name's Jane Turner. I'm the city's Oil and Gas and Air Quality Coordinator. And with a new member on council, I thought I would take this opportunity to just briefly reintroduce myself and reintroduce the city's oil and gas and air quality programs. My background, I received a PhD in air quality engineering from CU Boulder, and I have 15 years of experience in environmental monitoring, remediation, and working with environmental litigators. I accepted this job in April of 2020, and it was a new position at that time. So with that, let's get started talking about the programs. Okay, oil and gas in Longmont. We are at a position now where we have no active wells left in the city. That's something the city's been working towards for over a decade. In fact, the last 2 active wells were recently plugged just this summer in 2021. And you might wonder, do we have any concerns about future drilling within the city of Longmont? And as you know, the COGCC, that's the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, they are in charge of permitting and identifying locations for drilling that's not in the city's jurisdiction. However, in 2020, COGCC updated their rules, and they're quite a bit more stringent with oil and gas. And one of the things they did was extended their setbacks to 2,000 feet. And we believe that that new 2,000-foot setback is going to protect the city of Longmont from any future drilling. Visually, what that looks like, I'm showing here on this map. You can see in the light green areas, areas that are within 2,000 feet of a building, such as a home, a school, or a hospital. And so these areas are where the COGC would not allow drilling to occur. There are just a few small orange areas remaining where technically someone could drill, but the staff has looked at those areas, and logistically that would be incredibly difficult to bring an oil rig into those areas. So we feel confident that going forward we will no longer have oil and gas within the city. And so I said one of the programs I oversee is the oil and gas program, and we don't have any oil and gas. So what is that program? What do we do? We have 2 parts to the program, and the first is very important. That's regulatory participation. That's primarily with the COGCC, given that they permit oil and gas development and regulate their operations. We participated actively in 2020. I think there were 8 rulemakings that staff participated in. And right now we are currently participating in the COGCC Financial Assurances rulemaking. This is an opportunity for staff to review policies, offer critical feedback, also to advocate for the health of Longmont's residents and ecosystems, and especially to share the findings of our monitoring studies, because that data is really powerful for regulators. The second part of the oil and gas program is environmental monitoring, and we do quite an extensive amount of monitoring. We said that all the active wells are now closed within the city, and so when a well is closed, we come in, we contract out soil and water testing at plugged wells. You can see in that photo on the right, that's a couple of the yellow casings for monitoring wells at the Ryder number 1 site. We do groundwater monitoring near Union Reservoir, and we also take samples of the surface water. We sponsor third-party oversight for COGCC. As these wells have been closed out and remediated, we have always had our third party there to make sure that we're happy with the sampling going on. We also do air monitoring. We have some sensors near oil and gas facilities, and of course the research grade monitoring with Boulder Air that Dr. Helmig's going to talk a little bit more about as soon as I wrap this up. I want to show an example of environmental monitoring that we do as part of our oil and gas programs, and that's for the night wells. So the night wells, you can see in this map, they are the black star. They're outside of the city limits, north of Union Reservoir, but they are pretty close to the city. And so there are 12 wells there. They were drilled in the spring of 2021. They were fracked August to October. And then earlier this month, they just started a process called flowback, where they're bringing those fluids back up, and they're connected to pipelines, and they're moving them out east to be processed. So quite a bit of sampling. Right next to the star, you can see a small teardrop. All those teardrops are where we have groundwater sampling and then the water sampling in Union Reservoir itself. Up next to the night location, we also have 2 orange triangles indicating that the city has air monitors there, and CDPHE also, we worked with them, and they've had some sensors up there during the night well development. Down at the bottom, you can see a large yellow triangle indicating where we have the research grade sampling. The Union Reservoir samples have been reviewed. No issues have been flagged, no issues with the groundwater. I spoke today with the water lab folks. They are wanting to do a more detailed analysis looking at the water from Union Reservoir over time this whole year. They want to look at trends. They want to look to see if there was any more subtle impacts that they can pick up. So that's still in progress, but I'll be sure to keep you apprised of the results of that. And I mentioned that CDPHE had some sensors out at the night well during this development process, and so I wanted to just very briefly summarize their findings. These are available on the CDPHE's website. I'm going to be sending out a link to this report to our interest residents that subscribe to our air quality e-notifications, and I'd be happy to send that to council as well if you're interested. So generally speaking, what we're seeing here, this is a graph of total VOCs. That's an estimate from a sensor. VOCs are volatile organic compounds. That's a family of compounds that's part of oil and gas. It's of interest because some of the members of that family do have health impacts. So when we look at this graph, starting at the beginning of the year, we see a lot of orange crosses on the left. Those are measurements that were taken during the drilling of the 12 wells. And we see that there was a lot of action there. VOCs were pretty elevated. And then right next to the orange is a blue area. That's when they stopped drilling. So we see as soon as they stopped drilling, those VOCs came down quite a bit. There was then a period when CDPHD did not have monitors there. They did manage to monitor for the last half of the fracking event, and you can see in the light green there that the hydraulic fracturing actually had pretty low VOCs coming off the well site during that time. And then the last process is shown in purple. That's the flowback. We have seen a bit of a pickup in the VOCs right there by the site. However, that's wrapping up now. They're moving into production, which is a relief because this first development process is the time of an oil and gas well's lifespan where there's the most emissions. So we're looking forward to moving into production. The summary that CDPHE has on their website about this monitoring is that they don't expect that exposure to these VOCs will harm the health of neighbors living near these wells. Okay, now I want to talk just a little bit about ambient air quality. Ambient is kind of a strange word. It means the atmosphere around you. And ambient is the word that the EPA uses when they refer to the air that we all get exposed to as soon as we walk out our front door. So if you're at Union Reservoir, if you're on the streets of Longmont, that's the ambient air. EPA regulates ambient air, and they regulate just 6 compounds, and these have all been shown very clearly to all have health impacts. I'm going to talk just about the top 2 because those are the ones we have issues with here in Colorado. Ground level ozone and particulate matter. The particles, fine particles associated with smoke during wildfire season, that's becoming common around here. But the biggest issue is really the ground level ozone. And when I talk to our public health experts at the state and with counties, they remind me that this is air quality public enemy number 1. It's very exacerbating for respiratory issues. Kids with asthma are going to have more absences. This is the number 1 priority when it comes to health impacts for air quality. Now, the ground level ozone in Colorado is elevated so often that the EPA has determined that parts of Colorado are out of attainment for ground level ozone, and that's where the state comes in. The Colorado Department of Public Health and the Environment, that's the CDPHE, is then tasked by the EPA to create and implement a plan to decrease ground level ozone, to make it so that the air that residents are breathing is safe for them. Among many other things, CDPHE also issues air permits to industries that emit pollutants, and that includes oil and gas. So we have COGCC that's issuing permits overseeing operations. CDPHE is going to be looking at air emissions from oil and gas, and they'll also be responding to air quality health concerns. So if a resident reaches out to me expressing that they have some health concerns related to air quality, CDPHE is where I direct them to. They have the correct public health staff to give them the options that they need, and they're very responsive and very interested to learn what people are experiencing. Lastly, I'll just mention that CDPHE is doing research and more every single year. They have 2 very sophisticated mobile labs that they drive around, primarily to oil and gas sites. They've been deploying sensors like we saw, those that I just showed at the night wells. They're also doing more aerial surveys, so they're flying planes around to try to understand the air quality, pollutants, where they're coming from, and how to improve things. Lastly, I just want to mention some things that are not regulated in ambient air quality. A few examples of that are carbon dioxide, methane, and VOCs. So CO2 and methane, these are greenhouse gases. They are regulated, for example, if they're coming out of a stack, like at CMEX in Lyons. They will have a permit with CDPHE showing how much CO2 that they are going to emit. The same is true for VOCs. There are not regulations for ambient air for this family of chemicals. So if a person is out in the great outdoors and they get exposed to some elevated VOCs, there are no regulations that are going to be triggered by that. The state has, however, issued some health guidance values, and that helps us to put into context our findings. For example, these measurements that we take at Union Reservoir, we look at VOCs and we can compare those to health guidance values. Thus far, we don't have any exceedances of the health guidance values measured here in Longmont. And you heard me talking with this ambient air quality about the EPA and about the state, and so there's really not a lot that cities can do in their jurisdiction when it comes to ambient air quality. So once again, you might wonder, what is this air quality program? What do you do, Jane? What does it include? So here, our air quality program for the city, it overlaps significantly with oil and gas because we're very interested in the air emissions of oil and gas. It also overlaps with sustainability because we're interested in greenhouse gases, we're interested in climate. And the first most important component of this is the regulatory participation. Now, the city's a member of CC4CA, that's Colorado Communities for Climate Action, and they advocate very strongly on behalf of the city and 40 other cities for stronger climate policies. City staff have also been pretty active in participating separate from CC4CA. Myself and other staff have been collaborating with a number of communities along the Front Range. These are on EPA rulemakings, AQCC rulemakings. Again, we want to share our data. We want to share the experiences that we're hearing from our residents and from you all. And things are still really happening in air quality land. I'll just highlight a few things that are happening at the federal level. The EPA has updated the non-attainment area for ozone in Colorado. It's now been expanded to include all of Weld County. At the state level, the 2022 budget has been proposed. There is over $420 million in that budget for air quality and climate initiatives. My colleagues at CDPHE and COGCC tell me that they're looking forward to using that money to drastically increase inspections and monitoring. The state has a goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2030, and I'm currently participating in the Air Quality Control Commission rulemaking, and that one is specifically looking at oil and gas emission cuts for the oil and gas industry. They're looking to cut 60% by 2030. So still lots going on in the regulatory. Air Quality Program also sponsors this air quality study that Dr. Helmig's about to talk about. And that pertains to both oil and gas and sustainability. So over on the east side of town at Union Reservoir, we look quite in detail about these different VOCs and different components that are common to oil and gas air pollution. On the west side of town, our new station that we've just moved, we're focused a little bit more on climate change. So we're looking at greenhouse gases, and we want to be able to track how the city's efforts in that realm are making an impact there. Okay, so I'll just give an example here of what happens. What do we do with this data that we're collecting as far as this air quality study goes? When we have an air quality station that records a notable pollution event, I'm going to spring into action, other staff are going to spring into action. The information about the event is going to be shared internally and with residents via e-notifications. I'll continue to communicate with our contractors, Boulder Air, as they further discuss and analyze the data, and that data will also be presented here to council and is also presented in quarterly reports that are available on the city's website. Staff also reach out to the two state entities, so both CDPHE and COGCC. Complaints are filed with them. The data is shared. They will respond to us, and they have told me that they are using these sort of case studies, these events, as discussion points when COGCC talks to CDPHE about how do they want to change permits, how do they want to look at the next regulatory updates. These data examples are really helpful for them to have. Lastly, staff reach out to oil and gas operators. So we generally, with the wind direction, we have an idea where the source of these plumes are coming from, and we will reach out to oil and gas operators in that area. We'll share the data. We'll ask them to review their work logs, tell us what they were doing, see if we can identify any issues. We're trying to build a relationship that, they don't want air quality issues to be pinned on them, certainly, and so they've been responsive. They want to step up and be on their best behavior, and I think that data is useful for that. So last of all, I'll just mention, we did relocate our air quality station on the west side of town. It was formerly located at the airport, and they're building some hangars over there, a little too close to for comfort to our old station location. So we did find a new location to move that to. Some of the upsides of this new location that you can see on the right side of the picture there on Likens Gulch bike path. Some of the upsides are we think it's great visibility. Our residents will be biking or walking by and get exposed to our air quality study. On the downside, this location did not have power, so we had to bear the expense of bringing power to the location. Also, because it's so publicly accessible, we felt we wanted to protect those instruments, and so we have put in a fence and really updated the spot. I'm going to let Dr. Helmig talk about that because I know he does have a couple of photos of the new site. And with that, I will unless you have questions, I'll hand it over to Dr. Helmig.
Thank you, Mayor Peck. I'll be quick. Two questions about recent developments and how they affect your work. The first one is that we, out of the international COP26 convention that just happened, there was a new emphasis on controlling methane emissions, and I hope that will lead to local rulemakings and that our monitoring program will make more stringent use, give us new avenues for complaints and stuff based on the methane that comes to us from Weld County. So the first question is, are you doing anything about that? The second question is, what's the status for AQCC or whoever agency, I think it's AQCC, and enforcement of methane emissions from active wells?
Okay, first question. What are we doing about the methane? Because we do see these spikes of methane that come through. Yes, so participating in the current Air Quality Control Commission rulemaking is one of the ways that we've been able to share that data in particular. So that rulemaking is focused on cutting greenhouse gas emissions from the oil and gas sector in particular. We've written up a summary of our data, we've shared our data, and that's going to be included in the statements that are released by these local groups here on the Front Range. So, again, sharing the data is really the best way we've found there. We're certainly open to suggestions if people can think of other ways that we can, use that data or use our, staff however we can to improve when it comes to that, because it is really important. The status as far as methane being released, okay, if a well is existing, these new COGCC rules aren't going to necessarily apply to them. If it's a new oil and gas well that's been put in, they now have much more stringent rules to comply with. In fact, they are required to do round-the-clock air quality monitoring. Those monitoring reports are then submitted to CDPHE as well as to the municipalities that those wells are in. Again, we're in this kind of odd position here on the Front Range where we don't have any active wells within our limits, which means we have less control. They're outside the city, they're out, in Weld County. So we are relying on these new stringent COGCC regulations and requirements for air monitoring to hopefully improve that as we move forward.
Oh, I turned it off. Come on.
Thank you. Sorry, I should have just held the floor because I was sure I'd have a follow-up. What I'm asking about in particular is, it was that the new sense of urgency at the global level that's been associated with local methane emissions from drilling. Are we in a position to lobby, to even just watchdog for new rulings that come out, because that those old wells are not innocent, and we would like to see some some better enforcement put in place on those too, because it comes to us. And so I want to get the statement out there that we need to be watching for any opportunity to up our game on that, since we have the data.
Mayor and council absolutely agree, and greenhouse gases and climate policy's long been what CC4CA is advocating for. We as the city, even before the IPCC report came out, of course, that was a focus and something that we were concerned about. I will say, one thing about these new style of oil and gas wells is that they do turn over pretty quickly. So it's frustrating that, some of these new rules are only applying to new wells. However, these wells, within a number of years, they're kind of really getting down low on their production. So they're constantly drilling new wells, and that turnover will be helpful, I think, as far as implementing these new regulations. The COGCC regulation rulemaking that we're participating in right now, financial assurances, it doesn't indicate very well that this is mostly around getting old wells closed, making sure that abandoned wells are not just left abandoned, but they are being closed properly, they're being monitored, and that the finances are there to be able to do that. So we're trying to hit it from all the angles. I think the state is concerned, and we're making our voices heard.
Councillor Waters.
Dr. Turner, could you go back to slide 16, please?
Sure.
As I look at this slide, I see the variety of entities that can use the data that we're going to hear from Dr. Helming in just a bit. You made reference to the presentation to City Council. The one group, that's in this picture that can make no use of the data is this one, right? And yet we continue to bring Dr. Helmig on a Tuesday night to make a presentation to the one group who can't do anything with the data, right? It's not actionable for us, but it is for everybody else in terms, and what I don't think shows on this slide is the potential use going forward with our sustainability efforts as a way to evaluate effects of what, the variety of things that we are doing and plan to do to reduce our own carbon footprint, greenhouse gas emissions. So I've been puzzled, and I've asked this question before, and since you're here, before Dr. Helmig does the presentation, seems like the right time to ask it again. What's the highest and best use of his expertise and time, in addition to collecting of data and the analysis of data, in terms of sharing the data with the community? It seems to me that if we're going to ask him to take his time, wouldn't it make more sense to use him, to give him a chance to do a presentation where he can answer questions to the community, to the public that can care about this, even though we're pushing that information out? They won't get a shot at him, right, for face-to-face interaction. Record that, right, so we could run it, so people don't have to fast forward to a council meeting. We've got a public access television system that could tailor video presentations of him presenting these data, capture some of the Q&A. I mean, there's all kinds of ways we could, I think, make better use than what we do on a Tuesday night. Do you want to comment on that?
Mayor and council, I think it's a great idea. I think a science talk is maybe, an appropriate setting for people to really get into the weeds with Dr. Helmig.
Well, it gives us, we could do the same thing. We could be part of the public that gives us a chance to interact. That's way less stilted than it is here. I just think, in terms of meaning, there's one thing to have data, there's something else to have meaning from the data, and we don't create much in this format. I just think, in terms of highest and best use of his expertise and the data, there's got to be a better way to take advantage of what he brings in terms of the value we bring to the larger community than what we do here on a Tuesday night. So I'm looking forward to hearing that presentation. I wish I could do something with what we're going to hear.
Mayor and Council, I certainly appreciate the suggestion, and we look to you for direction, so we'll do whatever you like.
I appreciate your comment, Councilor Waters, and I think it's a great idea. And I would be interested in having a deeper conversation, maybe using the museum as a format to have public science and air quality, climate change conversation, a back and forth. So let's talk about that further and see what we can do.
Yeah, and then we will, because I think existing council direction is we bring this back for quarterly reports to you all. And
Yeah.
so if you do want to make that change, we will need that direction to do this in a different format
Okay.
and make Dr. Helmig available to the public for questions. So we'll just need that direction.
And we have had Dr. Helmig in public settings before, but it has not been council directed.
Correct.
So this would be different and good. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you.
Well, good evening, Mayor, council members, and the public. That set quite the stage for me. I'm very excited to be here. Hope I can meet your expectations. Let's see if I can get this started here. Okay, so another update. The previous one was on August 3rd. So it's about 4 months or something like that. So a few things have happened, and I'll work you through that. Let me see. We do this here. Okay, so just a recap of what I presented last time, August 3rd. Mentioned the new network site. I will show some more detail on that. There were some very extremely high oil and gas plumes, and then talked about that. We touched the air quality issues to that date in early August, and I will expand on that some more. Talked about some CO2 occurrences at the airport that were somewhat surprising, and then a bit of an outlook. So today, now another overview, since there's some new members here. I'll give you some more details about that airport site move, and then updates with some new data, new interpretations from the last 4 months. We're talking about ozone, particulate matter, some comparisons of the Longmont data with other sites, and then we're going to talk about methane, follow up on that question. New data, just 1 month now from the new station. I think we're seeing something interesting there. Selected pollution events, I was asked specifically to address those. And then a little bit more on the wildfire smokes that we all certainly noticed this past summer in the area. Again, we are operating under contract from the city 2 monitoring stations. One that was formerly at the airport. Now it was moved to the Lycans Ginch location. So we changed the code, and you'll see these letters all the time because they are abbreviations for the site locations. So the new code we have is LLG for Longmont's Lycans Gulch. Update, everything has been running. We're now in the 2nd year with observations from the western location. Also, the Union Reservoir is nearing 2 years of operation now. The website has been up and running. Everything is pretty much up and running. The website, we keep track of the visits. Last quarter 3, was an amazing increase in the visits to the website. It's the largest we've ever seen within 1 quarter, and it's about 2-3 times as many visits as we get for the other sites we're operating. So I'm surprised, I'm stunned about this interest there is in the public in these observations from the 2 Longmont sites. So it has steadily been kicking up for sure. So that's kind of a horror picture for us. Because that was just a few days before we then eventually moved that trailer. The new site wasn't quite ready, but you can see how close it got to kicking us out of there. You can see the construction work and preparation, and it was the last day or 2 Before then, that station was moved. And you've seen this before. Previously, it was located where that yellow circle is. And we moved it to that star, the red star there on the right. It's less than a mile to the east. It's a different location. It's not as close to the airport. It seems to be more rural, without, nearby obvious sources. But I will show you in a moment a little bit of a sort of a surprise, though I had a suspicion there. So just hold tight. I'm going to show this in a moment. And this is a beautiful new site. It was really nicely prepared by the city. You can see the trailer after it was moved, tower was erected. It's fenced, has a gate. Very, very nice. For me, as somebody who's been running stations for many, many years, this is a beautiful setup. Very, very nice. I'm very happy and proud of that. So now, this is the current network that Boulder Air operates. So there's 2 changes. You can see in the upper left that little change for the Longmont airport side going to Lycans Gulch, so it's just a little shift to the east. But we now also have in operation the Erie Community Center, which you see kind of there in the middle. We call it ECC. It's been up and running for a couple months, and that provides us another data set that's really valuable for comparison with the other locations. So we've really gained some new insight already from those first 2 months of observations at that new Erie site. Something I want to mention is that our observations follow as strict and high of a quality control process as we possibly can. We label our data as regulatory grade so that it's fully recognized by agencies such as the EPA and CDPHE. So we're always pushing that as hard as we can, and as part of that effort, we were audited. We initiated an audit by CDPHE, that's the agency that does these audits within Colorado. So there was an audit at the Longmont Union Reservoir on October 8th, and the new station at the Lycans Gulch on November 19th. And we had everything audited that the state will audit. So that includes ozone, nitrogen oxide and nitrogen dioxide, and particulate matter, and also the meteorology observations we're conducting. That's all they audit. They will not audit methane or VOCs. Some of the other species we monitor as well. But these audits were completed, and we're happy that all of our measurements fell within the quality control criteria. So there's a certain range of deviation that has to be met. They all complied with these quality control deviations. So you can see there, the state, they show up with their own monitors, they provide a standard, and then you measure these side by side with both set of instruments, you do the comparisons, you do some data evaluations, and then you get a certificate that you complied with the state expectations. So, ozone season wrap up in early August. I already mentioned that we were experiencing, rather unfortunately, a high ozone season this year, and that continued after the August 3rd presentation. You can see here the 8-hour average data. So we calculate an 8-hour running mean of the ozone observations, and this graph has both the data for the Longmont Union Reservoir and the airport. That yellow dotted line, that's the air quality standard for ozone for 8-hour observations, and you can see that that quality standard was exceeded on quite a number of days. Altogether, throughout the year, there were 34 days where the standard was exceeded at the airport location, and then there were 32 days where it was exceeded at the Union Reservoir. There's a second standard, an older standard of 75 ppb that the EPA is also still keeping track of, and that was exceeded as well on 18 days at both locations. The criterion for being in attainment with the ozone standard is 4 exceedance days on average over 3 years. So you can see with 34 days, we were ways above the threshold that we'd like to reach eventually to be back in compliance with the ozone air quality standard. So we have a long ways to go. This shows a comparison of the ozone data. Top left is the Union Reservoir, lower right was the airport site to that time of year. It puts side by side the distribution of the ozone in each month in 2020 versus 2021. You can see that ozone increases as we move towards the center of the summer. It's because you know by now ozone is a photochemically produced compound, so it's formed more so during warm, sunny, long days. You can also see, and these percent numbers on top of these graphs show you how much higher ozone was in 2021 compared to 2020. So that shows that during the peak of the ozone season, June, July, and August, we were significantly higher in ozone this year than the previous year. In 2020, August was a pretty high ozone year. We thought it was really extreme last year, but as you can see, this year we matched pretty much even the high ozone conditions in August that we had last year. This has a lot of information. I don't expect you to follow all these numbers, but this table shows the ozone monitoring sites maintained by the state, by CDPHE, and they keep track of the 5 highest ozone observations for each station. So it's every row is another station, and I have highlighted with these red boxes the stations here in the Front Range. Yeah, the sites that are not in boxes, those are other stations within the state that are not in the Front Range. And then when ozone exceeds the 75 ppb standard, the data are shown in this darker yellow, orange, and the lighter yellow is the exceedance of the 70 ppb standard. So you can see that all of these orange colors are for stations that are in the Front Range. Yeah, so what's important here to note is that ozone in the Front Range is so much higher than on the western slope, in the central mountains, on the south, in the south of the state. So the trouble sites are all in the Front Range. At the very bottom now, I added to this our own observations from the Union Reservoir. So you can see there the highest value of the year was 86, the second highest 86, the third 85, and the fourth highest was 83, and the fourth highest is what's used for the regulatory evaluation. So they only used the fourth highest of the year, and we had 83 here, and within the state for Longmont, that's the 7th highest in the state for the 4th highest 8-hour ozone max. Gosh, what term. Short story is, we are here in an area with high ozone. It's, among the stations that are measuring ozone in the state, it comes in 7th highest overall for this summer. So now, the next pollutant that we are concerned about from a health perspective is particulate matter. This shows the data for the smaller particles, PM 2.5. So these are particles smaller than 2.5 microns that can make it deep into your lungs and enter your system that way. And these data are averaged now as 24-hour averages, which is for PM, the regulatory standard. You can see that in 2021, that standard was exceeded on 3 occasions. On each of those, these exceedances lasted a bit longer than just 1 day. So overall, there were 6 days in 2021 where that health standard for particulate matter was exceeded. Okay, let's do some comparison of how the Longmont data compare with other sites within the network. I've just picked a few examples to give you a general idea. This shows the distribution of methane at the Broomfield Soaring Eagle, that's in green, Boda Reservoir, that's in blue, then the Longmont Airport in red, and the, what is that, purple, is then the Union Reservoir. So you can see that the Union Reservoir peaks is the highest when it comes to methane. That's consistent through all months that we've been analyzing this. These boxes show the distribution from the lowest values to the highest values. The round dots is the mean value, and the middle bar in the box is the median. So you can see at all these different statistical criteria, the Longmont Union Reservoir always comes in with the highest methane, meaning most likely that it's subjected to higher emissions nearby than any of the other stations. So it's been our highest methane side all through the last 2 years since we've been measuring this. Now we're doing this for 2 other compounds. On the left are the same type of analysis for ethane. And ethane is our favorite tracer for oil and gas operations. It's a very selective, specific tracer. And again, you can see that for the Union Reservoir, it has the highest ethane consistently. The level of increase or enhancement, I think, has come down a little bit compared to previous quarters, but it remains the highest ethane side within the network. Then on the right side, this is benzene. And there you can see for the last quarter, benzene at Union Reservoir is about the same. It doesn't stick out as a highly elevated location anymore, which we've seen in the past at times. So it compares reasonably well with the other locations, though it's a little bit biased because, and I'll show this in a moment, benzene during the summer was actually heavily driven by the wildfire smoke transport, and the whole region got subjected by those wildfire smoke events in a very similar fashion. And I think that's partly what you see here in these benzene data. Okay, we set the stage for the methane discussion. So there's this, a bit of information in here. So this is on methane. On the top left, these are not our data, but this is from NOAA. NOAA maintains a global network with methane observation, and they publish these methane trends, and the whole world uses this to evaluate where we're heading with methane. And this is a depressing story there, because over the 30 years that methane is plotted here, you can see it go up and up and up and up. It flattened out a little bit between 2000 and 2010, but then the last 10 years it's been going up and up and up and up. And you know, we want to go the opposite direction, many good intentions, but the data show methane in the world is going up and up and up, and almost looks like it's going up and up steeper and steeper. And methane is a very strong climate gas, and so this is very concerning. And if you look at the trend in methane, the global average increase between 2021 and 2020 is 15 parts per billion. So within 1 year, methane increased by 15 parts per billion. So now on the right side, just one example for just Q3, just to show you what we're doing with these data. This is from the airport, methane for Q3. 3 months, the distribution of methane, and this is the same, we call those box whisker plots. So the white dots are the mean values. These boxes are the 25 to 75 percentiles, and the bar, or the horizontal line, is the median. So if you look at all this data, we see an increase, a change between 2021 and 2020 for methane. That's at the airport plus 19 ppb, the median is 16 ppb. For the reservoir, it's 30 ppb, median is 21 ppb. So these increases we see here in Longmont are higher, and that's the bottom line, are higher than the global increase in methane. So this really doesn't show that methane emissions here are coming down or anything. This actually, you know, if these data are representative, but it's only 3 months. And there's other things that factor in, and it takes a lot of very thorough statistical work to do this, get really to the bottom of this. But a first look does not really argue for methane emissions coming down. And you've seen some opinions here advocate that conclusion. These data do not show that the methane in the region is coming down or is decreasing at a rate that's below the global average. Actually, it's the opposite. If you believe these data, I would say, you know, we have methane increases here, emission increases that are above what we see on a global average. Okay, so where is that methane coming from? So we do many of these plots where we look at what's the concentration in the air that comes in from north, east, south, and what's the dependence on the wind speed. Just a couple examples for methane. Airport left, Union Reservoir right. So this shows, the hotter colors show you the average higher concentrations come usually from the east, from the northeast. We've seen this before from that first quadrant sector. But you can also see, at calmer wind speeds, which is right in the center of the graph, there's a little bit of a distribution where, we can see some elevated methane from directions pretty much all around. This is, the number one climate gas we're concerned about, carbon dioxide. Data for Q3, just to follow up on the last presentation. We continue seeing what we saw before, that surprisingly at the airport, we see a strong methane signal from the west. And I mentioned last time that we can't fully understand that. Why is there this much CO2 coming from the west of the airport side? Union Reservoir, that makes a lot of sense. The reservoir is on the eastern edge of the city with 100,000 people or something like that. To the west of the site, you would expect most of the elevated CO2 coming from that direction. And that's exactly what the data show. So now this is very fresh. This is the last month. We moved the airport trailer to the new site late October, and it started collecting data on November 1st. So this is 1 month of data, the first month we have from that Lycans Gulch site. And very curious how this would look now compared to what we saw previously, just a mile further to the west. And it has shifted. It has shifted a little bit. We still see, elevated levels coming from the east. That's where the city is, both for CO2 and for methane. That makes a lot of sense. But at calmer winds, we see some source that appears to be in the northwest sector, if you look closely, in the northwest sector. And we don't see it at higher wind speeds, mostly at calmer wind speeds. And I was wondering about that when we inspected the site first. I have an idea, but we need to look at this more closely. There's this farm, it's called Sky Pilot Farms, and actually have a nice internet site, and it's a meat-producing facility. And I remember actually hearing, I think you can hear the chicken or turkeys or something there when it's quiet and the winds come from there. So I wonder if what else would bring methane in from that wind direction. So this is possibly a signal we're picking up from that meat production facility. Very, very interesting that our data analysis actually can point to a source like that. And it's not something important to also bear in mind when we talk about reducing CO2 and methane emissions. There's some sources that are obvious to address, others, such as this, that may potentially contribute, are much more challenging to control their emissions. Okay, so then I was specifically asked, next topic here, to look at any potential signals that we may have observed from the night well. So again, this is the map showing with the yellow star the location of the Union Reservoir monitoring site, and the night well is that black star. What's important to realize is that we are almost straight south, maybe a little bit southwest. So if we observed transport from the night well, it would come pretty much from 20-30 degrees north. Yeah, because that's how these two sites are oriented to each other. So let's keep our eyes open. What do we see when air is transported from that wind sector? So what I did first is I plotted all the data we have. For instance, this is methane now, methane at the reservoir from it's almost 2 years now, January 2020. And with these bars on the right, you see the different stages of the drilling of the night well. So the drilling in blue, the hydraulic fracturing, and this, what is this, brownish color. The lighter brown is what they call site build-out. And then they just started the flowback production 2 weeks ago. So question is, do we see a big change, increase, something that sticks out for the period of the night well production? Bear in mind, these are all data, they're not wind direction filtered, but we would expect 20–30% of the time winds out of that window. If you have a strong source, I think we would clearly see that. I wouldn't argue that we've seen much of a difference in methane since the work began at that well. So let's do the same for ethane, which is our favorite oil and gas tracer again. At the beginning of the program, in the first 2 months, there was a lot of elevated ethane spikes. I talked about that a couple times before. And we had those 2 big transport plume events in January and February this year, and I talked about that here as well. So now looking at the remainder of the year, since the work at the well has been ongoing, ethane data looks, we could call it normal, but it doesn't look, it doesn't seem to show anything that's deviating notably from what we've seen before. And now look at benzene. Similar to benzene, there were 2 benzene spikes in January and February, but that was right before the drilling started. So during the drilling window, again, benzene looks, doesn't look that unusual, I would say. And that now puts the Longmont data. It's a little bit hard to pick this out in, again, this pinkish color, together with the benzene at the Boulder Reservoir, at Soaring Eagle in Broomfield, and another site in Broomfield that's actually has been subjected to some emissions from an ongoing fracking operation there. So the dark green is actually, I would say, the highest benzene for this year at the Broomfield site, but the benzene at the Union Reservoir has been relatively moderate in comparison to the other sites. Another thing we can do is look at the dependency of these different tracers on the wind speed and wind direction. So you've seen these graphs before. On the very top are our 2 oil and gas tracers, ethane and propane. And you can see there an enhancement in transport from the north. So there's potentially higher concentrations, more abundantly transported from the direction of the night well. It could come from other wells further out. That's hard to tell with this analysis. But for ethane and propane, there clearly is a stronger signal transported straight from the north. For acetylene at the bottom and benzene, we don't see that. For those, I would say, the city and maybe Highway 119 to the south appear to be stronger sources, and we don't see a strong signal from the direction of the night well. Okay, so then I was specifically asked to comment on 2 events that were seen in the last quarter that resulted in elevated concentrations of some of these oil and gas tracers. I'm pointing this out here. Those events occurred on October 4th and November 29th. So I'll look at those specifically now with the next few slides. So they did overlap with the work at the night well. This shows the same events for methane. So you can see that the last event, which happened yesterday, we worked pretty frantically yesterday and this morning to put this together. It's actually, within the whole record, it's the 3rd highest methane spike we've seen at the Union Reservoir so far. So let's look first at the October 1st event. That happened early in the morning, around 5 o'clock. So you can see the top trace shows 1 week of data for methane. The one below shows the ethane. The very bottom shows the benzene. Benzene didn't really peak up much, but you can see that methane and ethane, the natural gas tracers, both went up together to pretty significant concentrations. Methane went to 5,000 parts per billion and ethane to about 200 parts per billion. And that's about 200 parts per billion, that's that's about 100 times higher than the background. So 200 parts per billion, that's a lot. That's 100 times higher than the background. So that's a big spike. So what we then do, we look at, where the wind's coming from. So again, that's the spike there, and this now is just at one single day on October 4th. It's a 24-hour plot showing the higher resolution data. Methane on the top. Below you see the wind direction, and the very bottom is the wind speed. What we always see when we have these spikes, these plume events, that the winds are actually relatively calm. When it's windy, it dilutes very, very quickly, and the concentrations go down very quickly. You see these high spikes, high concentration when it's calm. So the winds were very, very calm, very low wind speeds. And the wind direction now, if you look closely, right before that peak, winds were right around zero-ish, and then shifting a little bit to the west. So that came from the north. So this event actually, it looks like it came from the north, and then as the winds shifted more towards the west, concentrations dropped. So that's potentially right from that window where we have that well site location. And then that was yesterday. So that happened yesterday, late afternoon. You can see methane went up to about, these are the 5-minute data, to about, that's 14 parts per million, 14,000 parts per billion. The 1-minute data, the higher time resolution, went all the way to 27 parts per million. So that's almost 15 times above background. It's a huge increase in methane. That's a big methane spike. Below you see the wind direction. In this case now, the winds were steady from the east, right on 90 degrees. 90 degrees is straight from the east, and then they slowly shifted from 90 to 180. So they shifted from east to the south. So this is clearly a different direction than what we expect from the night well. So this came over the reservoir from further out to the east. And as winds then shifted more to the south, the peak disappeared. So this came from somewhere else. It's a very significant enhancement in methane. It also caused enhancement in ethane and propane. There the sampling time was a little bit different because the VOCs are collected from the hour to 10 minutes after the hour, so we didn't quite catch that peak, but we did see enhancements in ethane and propane. And again, 200 parts per billion of ethane, 200 times above the background. So that was just last night, about a day ago. So very clear oil and gas signature. And that shows toluene and benzene at the bottom. And that also went up, not super high. We've seen higher levels than that before, but it was an increase in ethane and propane and benzene and toluene. And that again shows the overlap of the VOC sample with the wind direction. It was straight from the east. When the VOC sample was collected, this was coming straight from the east across the reservoir. That wind direction and wind speed, just to show you how calm the winds were, just 2-3 meters per second when this happened. Okay, there was another, that's the third spike event that I think is pretty notable because that's for a different compound. That's acetylene. Acetylene, you may know from its welding gas. It's used in industrial uses for welding, for torch welding, but it's also a product that's formed during flaring and fires. In this area, it's often used as a tracer for flaring. And we had a very notable spike there where acetylene went to 18 parts per billion. And you can see within the whole record, that's huge. That's 2-3 times higher than the highest we've ever seen before out of now 40,000 measurements or something like that. So what was happening? Where did the acetylene come from? So now we look again at this acetylene peak, and these are now the data for that day, that one particular day. It shows within that box the time when this happened for acetylene, and benzene went up as well. Methane went up, that's on the very top, though methane went not up nearly as much, but there was a little bit of methane in there. And at the very bottom now, that's the important graph, that shows the wind direction. And you can see that this happened right when the winds shifted to the north. And there was just an hour or half an hour where the wind direction dropped to like zero-ish, and that's, where that one well pad is. And then we picked up on high acetylene and high benzene and methane. So this could potentially come from that night well pad. But it wouldn't be, this is not an oil and gas signature, this is a flaring signature. So I don't know, if there was flaring or burning going on at the time, but that's a potential signal that we picked up from operations that are right within that wind sector. Okay, and I think this is last topic now. Wildfires, if you were here, not in Hawaii last summer, you all noticed that, with the reduced visibility, you could smell it during many days. So we're heavily impacted by wildfires, and that's driving relatively high levels of particulates in the air. This is why we can't see very far, because the particles, they block the light. This shows the monitoring data for the small particles, PM2.5 again, during 2 weeks in August when we were really heavily impacted. It shows the high resolution data, that's the wiggly line, and then the smoother data, the 24-hour average data, and again the dotted line is the air quality standard. So you can see how the standard was exceeded. This has data both for the Union Reservoir and the Broomfield Soaring Eagle, and you can see how closely they fall on top of each other. So, when we get hit by the smoke, you can't run away from it. If you're in Longmont, if you go to Boulder or Broomfield or Erie, it's the same smoke. That smoke came transported from so far away, it's so far spread out, that it's pretty much the same within the whole Front Range. So the whole Front Range was subjected to very similar levels of these elevated particulates. Now, when these particles happen, the smoke gets transported through the air. Again, the particles are on the top. Then what you also see is that some of the VOCs go up. The middle plot now shows the benzene, and the bottom shows, that's in this case ethene, not ethane, it's ethene. It's an unsaturated hydrocarbon. So some of these hydrocarbons are really high in these smoke plumes, and benzene is one that's actually, of all the ones we've looked at, has the highest correlation. So the smoke plumes, when we see the smoke, we smell it, there's a bit of benzene in there, and that benzene can actually be more than what we see from other sources in the regions. This plots these different pollutants against the particles. So at the bottom is the particles. Basically, low particles means clean air, high particle numbers means really, really dirty, a lot of smoke. And then on the y-axis are the data for these VOCs. So you can see this correlation between benzene and the particles. It's a very nice force, it's a very nice tight correlation. The particles bring a lot of benzene into the area. And you can see under the higher particle loadings, we have about a 4 or 5 times higher level of benzene, up to 0.5 parts per billion. This is the strongest in correlation compared to these other tracers, acetylene, toluene, and there were questions asked, what about NOx, nitrogen oxides, because it's driving ozone? Do the smoke plumes bring a lot of nitrogen oxides, and is that maybe then causing higher ozone? But it's really not. There's no clear correlation. If you look at the bottom right, nitrogen oxides don't correlate with the smoke. It's not the smoke brings nitrogen oxides. Same as always, it seems. And then, this is probably the most important graph of my presentation, because it feeds the discussion of, how much of the high ozone we saw this summer. What was it? 33 days of exceedances. You've seen opinions that state, this is because of the smoke. We are doomed because of all that smoke. We have high ozone. It's out of our control. There's not much we can do. How valid is that argument? That argument is kind of challenged by this graph. It shows the ozone on the y-axis as a function of the particles. So particles now on the right, on the bottom. Again, the higher to the right, the higher the particles, the worst days are on the right there when the particles just went through the roof. So, and then the color coding defines the data points by the time of day. And you know ozone gets formed during the day mostly, and it's lower at night, so the high ozone values are the dark brownish colors, which is late afternoon, evening. That's when ozone is the highest, and then at night it comes down. So the important message, conclusion from this analysis is that as it gets smokier and smokier and smokier, actually ozone doesn't go up. Actually, you could argue that actually at the highest levels of smoke, there's actually less ozone than when it's not as smoky. The highest ozone levels are seen at the lower smoke levels. So then under the normal conditions box, that kind of defines conditions when there is no smoke. You know, these are the data for the whole quarter, so this is smoke and not smoke. But clearly the highest ozone, many of the higher ozone are associated when it's clean, when there are not wildfires, and when the wildfires move through, it doesn't clearly appear to be driving elevated ozone. I would actually say, you know, you could argue for the opposite. That's at least the conclusion based on the 2021 data from the Union Reservoir. Okay, that's my last slide. Just again, the summary. New site location, we learned more about the smoke. I showed you about methane going up, maybe even more so in the region than globally. We looked at the particles and the ozone that from an air quality standard, from a health perspective, we would think are the most concerning pollutants that we need to keep watching here all together, trying to stay healthy. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Detlev. That was very interesting. Because of the length of that presentation, I'm hoping that we don't have any Q&A at this point. Thank you. It's very good.
Okay, thank you.
Does anybody have any objection to a 2 or 3 minute break here? Let's make it a 5-minute break. Yes? Well, I know they have. So I'm asking.
Well, I would just assume that if you're asking, I'd rather hear from the public before we take a break.
What about the rest of it? I'm going to have a 2-minute break because I need to get up. Okay, I think we're all back. We can reconvene. We're ready for the public invited to be heard section, and I would like to remind everyone who comes up to the podium that you need to be wearing your masks and that you have 3 minutes to talk on the subject. The first one that we have on our agenda tonight is Eric Wallace.
Good evening, Mayor Peck, council members. I come in peace. I'm here on behalf of my family, including my 3 children, my business, Left Hand Brewing Company, and its employees seeking housing, Prosper Longmont, who's advocating for workforce attainable for purchase housing in our city, and those who are currently looking for or aspire to buying a home and growing roots in our community, the next generation. Our city is a highly desirable place to live, and more people want to live here than we have homes for. Our company hires people both locally and from other parts of the country. Their ability to find a reasonable place to live in Longmont has increasingly become a challenge, and they continue to look outside of town. I urge City Council and City staff to create a program to specifically address our workforce housing crisis. A recent Rosen Group study commissioned by the National Association of Realtors quantified the national housing shortage at 5.5 to 6.8 million homes. The study also identified the need for new home construction of 2.1 million a year for the next 10 years. That would require that Longmont build 6,200 new homes in the next 10 years to close the current housing gap. It is now time for council to take the tactical actions necessary to attain the goals, activating and aligning both city and community resources in the interest of the collective well-being of our city and all of its residents. We all need to commit to addressing the known problem of attainable workforce housing and to hold ourselves accountable collectively to putting plans in place to fix it. Prosper Longmont and numerous community organizations are here tonight to support and to encourage council to create a specific program to set a goal for the number of 4 purchase homes and to identify opportunities to accelerate the approval of and construction of housing sufficient to match the supply to the demand within our community. Council has already acted to approve 2 complementary strategic plans that specifically call out strategies to address our housing crisis. Envision Longmont strategies 1.2, 1.6, 1.10, 1.20, 3.5, 3.6, 3.7, and 6.2 are all strategies already approved by council to address our housing challenges. Advanced Longmont 2.0 identifies collective impact as a tool to achieve growth, prosperity, and inclusion within Longmont. Collective impact is a powerful framework to improve communication, alignment, and institutional knowledge between private, public, and nonprofit partners in our community. It also creates and deploys innovative projects that accelerate community and economic impact. Advanced Longmont 2.0 includes within its placemaking strategic focus the priority to ensure residential affordability for current and future residents. The City Council Work Plan Goal B1 includes have a diverse housing stock with higher densities. We are here to help. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Our next person up is Lonnie Kramer.
Mayor Peck, City Council, thank you for hearing me tonight. My name's Lonnie Kramer. I'm the president of Longspeak Hospital, and it's my privilege to present today in benefit of the Housing Affordable Act. And Eric quoted most of the stuff that I was going to say tonight, but I also want to add a little more fact. According to the FY 2020 Census Bureau, the average income for 82% of our workers falls below $77,000 annually. When you look at 82% of our workforce in that range, that means for housing to be attainable in Longmont, it needs to be less than $1,925 a month, all in. So as we continue to recruit and try to hire, we employed 313 additional staff members last year, and I could tell you the biggest downfall and the reason many turned down the job, they couldn't afford to live here. They couldn't find a house that their family could move into here, so they turned us down. As we continue to recruit the best of the best in healthcare and in our workforce, we need your support in allowing them to come here. So with that, I'll end by saying 67% of our workforce right now lives outside of Longmont. To me, that's a problem. Our economy deserves to have our people here using our stores, using our restaurants, using our local businesses. So thank you for your support and thank you for hearing me tonight.
Thank you, Lonnie. Up next is Aparna Palmer.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Aparna Palmer. I'm the new vice president who oversees the Boulder County campus of Front Range Community College, which is in Longmont, Colorado. We have about 450 employees that work for the campus and about 2,000 students. In 2017 and 18, when we commissioned our last economic impact study, the economic impact of the Boulder County campus was over $75 million. This figure included our operations funding, our construction funding, our students funding, and our alumni impact. That is just to say that we are an important part of the success of this community. When that study was commissioned, we had 302 employees, and as I mentioned before, we now have 450 employees. As we constantly adapt to the evolving pandemic, we have the opportunity to grow our impact and our contribution to the community. But one of the most significant barriers we face is housing. Simply put, we will not be able to grow and serve more of the people who need us if housing for our workforce, as well as our students and their families, continue to be a challenge. We are being outcompeted by other places in Colorado for both employees and students because of the lack of attainable housing. Just a couple of weeks ago, 2 of our job offers were rejected once the prospective employees saw the price of housing in the area. Their families could not afford to live here. Our campus is filled with professionals. They come from fields such as manufacturing, computer science, business, and engineering. They have expertise in literature, art, biology, graphic design, and a variety of different disciplines. Our staff specialize in advising, recruitment, disability services, and tutoring. They enrich our communities where they live financially, intellectually, and culturally. They are all committed to transforming lives through education, but fewer and fewer can afford to live here. I ask of you today to think about and discuss and really ponder how we can achieve more attainable housing in this area. This is a key to our prosperity as a community. The prosperity of Longmont depends upon a plan for more attainable housing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aparna. Joni Lynch? No, I'm sorry, David Emerson is next.
Dave Emerson left, he's from Habitat.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Then it is Joni Lynch.
Hello, I'm Joni Lynch. I'm the Family Resource Director at the Our Center here in Longmont, where I've worked for the past 9 years. Prior to that, I worked at Thistle Community Housing 20 years ago, and then for another affordable housing developer in my home city of Washington, D.C. I'd like to start tonight by applauding all that the City of Longmont and Boulder County have done to help further affordable housing in our geographic region through acquisition, new construction, and rehab of affordable housing, through vehicles such as administration of federal CDBG and home funds and the Longmont Affordable Housing Fund. On the home ownership side, I'd like to thank Boulder County's first-time home buyer classes, down payment assistance, and their PI program. I applaud Longmont leaders and community members who are open to exploring additional ways to increase density and affordable housing stock per the discussion among City Council earlier tonight. I'm thankful for the additional pass-through financial assistance for rent, mortgage, and utility assistance provided by the city and Boulder County in response to the pandemic, all of which prevented many hundreds of families from becoming homeless over the past 20 months. There is so much to be thankful for, but it is not enough. And now we are asking the city and the community to act quickly and decisively to put plans into action to bring forth the additional affordable housing units needed in our community over time. On behalf of the Our Center, we support the efforts of Prosper Longmont to work in partnership with city staff and community members to hold ourselves accountable to what we as a community outlined in the Envision Longmont plan with respect to the development and preservation of affordable housing for the entire continuum of housing needs, including affordable starter homes for workforce housing, as mentioned earlier this evening. Our center sees every day the barriers created by low household incomes and high housing costs in Longmont. We've seen more families having to make the difficult decision to leave this community because they can't afford to stay. During the pandemic, these challenges have grown considerably, and we expect the recovery to take years. Since March 2020, our center has distributed nearly $1.6 million in direct financial assistance for housing and utility assistance to keep hundreds of local families housed and current on their rent and utility payments. We look forward to working with our partners, city leaders, city staff, and community members to assist Prosper Longmont in holding ourselves as a community accountable to implementing our affordable housing goals in a timely manner before we lose additional community members, workers, and our economic base to other regions. Thank you.
Thank you, Joni. John Creighton.
Good evening. John Creighton, 328 Pratt Street. I'd like to reinforce some of the things that you all discussed earlier and share some insights as a lender with High Plains Bank. One of the things that we notice on a regular basis is we work with nurses, teachers, construction workers, even bank employees who can qualify for a loan to purchase a home. But the lack of supply that we have of housing has distorted our market and has distorted, it really is distorting our community. We regularly see sellers get 10, 20, even 30 offers on their property, often above asking price and often above a reasonable appraisal price. And so what that says is that only those who can pose as cash buyers are able to participate in the housing market. And those who admit that they need financing to buy a home are cast aside from consideration. The lending community of which I'm part, we certainly can and should work together to mitigate this challenge. However, nothing is fundamentally going to change until there's an increase in supply. And until we make a concerted effort to have specific goals to increase the supply, we are sending the message to our workforce, as you've heard tonight, that they need not apply in Longmont. So we as a community, we really need to decide collectively whether we're serious when we say we want the workforce of Longmont to have the option to live in Longmont. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Joe Thompson.
Thank you, council members. Thank you for allowing me the time to speak. My name is Joe Thompson. I've been a resident of Longmont for 3 years. I'm a father of 3 and a small business owner. After seeing an article about Prosper Longmont, I reached out to Eric for an initial conversation. I was skeptical at first, thinking this would be another half-hearted attempt to provide somewhat more affordable housing. But I must admit, after speaking with Eric and learning more about Prosper Longmont, I was very much impressed with how they're trying to overcome a lot of the obstacles. Overall, I would like to say that as a father of three, and the attempt that Prosper Longmont is looking at, it's really encouraging to know that there is a true attempt to make a big difference. And a lot of it seems to revolve around coming up with fresh ideas and really thinking outside of the box. And that seems to be the biggest thing. As a family man in this town, I'd love to stay here, but after hearing everything that's been presented, it seems that a fresh perspective and thinking very far outside the box is the only way we're going to get this accomplished on the scale that's needed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. Polly Christensen.
Okay. I'm here to talk about Prosper Longmont, but I would also like to advise you to reread the May 4th, 2021 Inclusionary Housing Program Report, which gives us the goals, gives us the deficits, gives us almost everything you just asked for. I would suggest you read it again because since 2015, when I first brought the housing ordinance forth, the Affordable Housing Ordinance, we've gotten countless reports. And they may need to be updated, but we don't need to start all over again and form working groups and start from scratch. As I said, I'm here to discuss Prosper Longmont, which promotes itself as a housing advocacy group. It is part of and derives its funding from LEDP, Longmont's outsourced majority public-funded economic development organization. And as a taxpayer, I resent having to pay for a lobbying group formed to undermine council and city staff policymaking. It says it is composed of Longmont residents, business owners, and civic leaders on the issue of workforce attainable housing for purchase. What do the words attainable and workforce mean? They are both terms coined by the real estate industry. Workforce, one would think, would be defined by people who actually have a job, but it's actually defined by the real estate industry as those making 80 to 120% of AMI, area median income. What does attainable mean? It has no actual definition. Anything is attainable if you work hard and have good luck. In contrast, affordable has a very clear definition by Housing and Urban Development. No more than 30% of pre-tax income is spent on housing, period. Affordable, low-income housing for both purchase and rent are what we need. And we've been told over and over again, including in this report, that the greatest need is for people making 40% of AMI or less. Preferencing middle-class, white married people over desperately poor people is a mistake and a grave injustice. We are told that the area median income for Longmont is $70,375. That is perhaps a family income, but it is not per capita. The per capita income is $36,464, according to the U.S. Census and the American Family Survey and Data USA. People who work 40 hours a week at $12.32 an hour, which is minimum wage, make $25,652. That is where our greatest need is, because that is what Longmont is actually making.
Thank you, Polly. Next up is Hermine. I can't pronounce her last name. Hermine Nomir. Sorry, Hermine.
Thank you. Thank you all so much, City Council, Mayor, for the opportunity to be here today. I actually was going to go in a slightly different direction, but I want to because I'm usually so much on your side with everything that Polly had to say. I want to address a couple aspects of it. I'm part of Prosper Longmont, and I generally represent that far left progressive side, and I found such a joy working with the team and the folks that I've been able to work with there at Prosper Longmont. I'm not getting paid a cent. I'm definitely volunteering. I'm a business owner here, and I am fortunate because I'm in the service industry that I can hire a lot of people remote and don't have a lot of the struggles that some of the businesses are having that need to hire people to be here physically. Within that, I do want to add two aspects. I am very much in support of lower income and affordable housing, and I don't know that we've done enough in that space. So I'm not going to argue that, but I know also that we have not done enough in the attainable space. I'm not sure how it's being
Hermine,
defined.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but would you address the chair, please? And not,
Oh, I'm sorry.
Polly,
Yes, absolutely.
thank you.
I just love her. Okay. I don't know enough about how things are being defined, but I do know when we look at attainable housing, what I'm looking for is for youth to have similar opportunities that I had. I'm an immigrant to this country. I, started off kind of in a mud hut, and I've been able to send my kid to great schools, private schools, graduated from college, buy a home, and now will be able to ramp up at some other businesses because I have equity. Those are the hopes, dreams, and aspirations that we're hoping for, is that people aren't just living in affordable housing and making that next rent opportunity or that rent check, but are actually creating wealth and being able to build and have a chance at the American dream. I know that's a lot to ask for inside the space of what we're doing today. The second aspect, and I don't know if I have time, I do, is as you guys look at some of these solutions, I'm really begging that you consider simplifying the complex. When I talk to, and I've had the joy of talking to Harold and some of you guys here, I can't believe how complex some of this stuff is and how one group will say one thing and another will say the other, and they're completely direct opposites. So as you look at this task force or people to help solve the problem, I'm really hoping that we come from a perspective of the solutions, and that we look at things in a way that we create simplicity and look to simplify the process. Within there, that's it. I really appreciate you affording me this time. Thanks.
Thank you, Hermine. Anne Marie Jensen.
Hi there, I'm Anne Marie Jensen. I'm the director of the East County Housing Opportunity Coalition, and we are not a member of Prosper Longmont, but we do acknowledge the identified need for workforce housing. We support Prosper Longmont in their desire to set a goal and measure the city's efforts towards increasing attainable housing in the city. We're not sure that that's the only problem. We all know that the market alone is not going to provide entry-level housing for workers in the community, and we know that home ownership is the key to intergenerational wealth building, and that so many have been left out of that opportunity. And we believe it makes sense to measure the need and set a goal and adopt proactive policies to achieve that goal. But we also, in our report that we sent to you maybe 5 or 6 months ago now, have also identified the need of very low-income housing for people who are really on the margin. And we encourage you not to forget them in this process. As you prioritize housing, think about it as a continuum and measuring where we need to be with good data along the continuum so that we're not just building to what we think we need, but what we really do need. In this country and in this county, we have a long history of discrimination and policies that have created inequity. We urge you to be intentional about combating the effects of inequity as you study this program. And by that, I mean this. Currently, lenders are 40% more likely to reject Latino applicants 50% more likely, this is today, this is not 10 years ago, 50% more likely to reject Asian and Pacific Islander applicants, 70% more likely to reject Native American applicants, and 80% more likely to reject Black applicants. Those are formulas that are algorithms, but they're based on the history. And as you know, our history has been discriminatory towards people of color. So if we just build more attainable housing and we don't take steps to make sure it's used equitably, it won't be, because it isn't being done that way throughout the country because there are built-in biases. So I encourage you to think about equity as you do something about attainable housing, and also not to forget those who are currently homeless or one paycheck away from homeless. And I know the state is doing a lot about that, but I encourage you to tap into those. And we are here as a resource and want to be helpful to you, and anything we can do to try and support you. And as a reminder, one of the things we're doing, since you talked a lot about climate change and emissions, on December 6th, we are having a workshop via Zoom to look at growing greener, which is how can we build more housing and do so in a way that contributes to the least amount of damage to our environment. So I encourage you to attend that. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne Marie. Well, it seems like there's one theme going here, and it's all about housing. And that's good. I'm very encouraged that so many people in our community are looking at that. I have so many papers here, I'm trying to wade through them. So the next thing that we have to do is the consent agenda. So I'm going to ask Dawn if you would please read the consent agenda for us.
Yes, Mayor Peck. Item 9A is ordinance 2021-71, a bill for an ordinance making additional appropriations for expenses and liabilities of the city of Longmont for the fiscal year beginning January 1st, 2021. Public hearing and second reading scheduled for December 14th, 2021. 9B is ordinance 2021-72, an ordinance authorizing the refinancing of the lease purchase agreement dated as of August 1st, 2014, and the 2014 certificates of participation. Public hearing and second reading scheduled for December 14th, 2021. 9C is ordinance 2021-73, a bill for an ordinance amending chapters 1404, 1412, 1424, and 1450 of the Longmont Municipal Code on fees and charges assessed in utility bills. Public hearing and second reading scheduled for December 14th, 2021. 9D is ordinance 2021-74, a bill for an ordinance amending section 4.08.040 of the Longmont Municipal Code on city rebate programs for income qualified residents and affordable housing operators. Public hearing and second reading scheduled for December 14th, 2021. 9E is ordinance 2021-75, a bill for an ordinance conditionally approving the vacation of a portion of Emery Street right-of-way associated with the 210 Emery Street minor subdivision plat and site plan generally located at the northeast corner of 2nd Avenue and Emery Street. Public hearing and second reading scheduled for December 14th, 2021. 9F is ordinance 2021-76, a bill for an ordinance approving the concept plan amendment for the Daniels annexation located at the southeast corner of State Highway 66 and Alpine Street. Public hearing and second reading scheduled for December 14th, 2021. 9G is resolution 2021-121, a resolution of the Council of the City of Longmont, Colorado, finding that the petition for annexation of a parcel of land located in Boulder County, State of Colorado, known as the Rivertown Annexation, generally located north of Boston Avenue and west of Sunset Street at 21 South Sunset Street, substantially complies with the Colorado Revised Statute, Section 31-12-1071. 9H is Resolution 2021-122, a resolution of the Longmont City Council approving the intergovernmental agreement between the city and the state of Colorado for a library grant. 9I is Resolution 2021-123, a resolution of the Longmont City Council approving the agreement between the city and the Next 50 Initiative for grant funding for fire stops at Longmont Housing Authority Senior Independent Living Facilities. 9J is Resolution 2021-124, a resolution of the Longmont City Council approving the intergovernmental agreement between the city and Boulder County for financial assistance to older adults. 9K is Resolution 2021-125, a resolution of the Longmont City Council approving the business lease between the city and Dennis L. Blomker and Carolyn A. Blomker for 500 Kimbark Street, Suite 101. 9L is Resolution 2021-126, a resolution of the Longmont City Council authorizing the city to apply for a grant for the 2021 Peace Officers Behavioral Health Support and Community Partnerships Grant Program. And 9M is approve one capital improvement program amendment. And Mayor, staff would like to pull items C and D for a very brief presentation.
Can I have a motion to move this consent agenda?
I move the consent agenda list C and D.
Okay, that has been moved. The consent agenda has been moved by Councilwoman Martin, seconded by Councilmember Waters. Let's vote. Okay, that passes unanimously. Okay, so we're going to ordinances on the second reading and public hearings on any matter. Item A, 2021-65, a bill for an ordinance repealing and reenacting chapters 16.04, 16.06, 16.12, 16.14, 16.16, 16.20, 16.22, 16.28, and 1640 of the Longmont Municipal Code, adopting by reference the 2021 edition of the International Building, Residential, Mechanical, Fuel Gas, Plumbing, Property Maintenance, Energy Conservation, Swimming Pool and Spa, and existing building codes. Public hearing and second reading scheduled for November 30th, 2021. Is there a staff report on this? No. Are there any questions from council? No. I would like to open the public hearing on ordinance 2021-65. Is there anyone that would like to speak on this ordinance? There's no public here. Okay, seeing none, I would like to, is there anyone else that would like to speak on this before I close the public hearing? Seeing no one, I'll close the public hearing and ask for a motion. If a council member doesn't jump in with this one, then I'm going to do it.
I move to pass ordinance 2021-65.
Second.
Okay, the ordinance has been passed by Susie Hidalgo Faring and seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Rodriguez. Let's vote. Okay, that carried unanimously. So the next one on the second reading is 2021-66. This is a bill for an ordinance repealing and reenacting Chapter 1632 of the Longmont Municipal Code, adopting by reference the 2021 edition of the International Fire Code. Public hearing and second reading scheduled for November 30th, 2021. Is there a staff report on this one? No. Any questions from council? Seeing none, I will open up to the public hearing. Anyone from this public want to speak on this? Seeing none, I will ask for a motion for council member to move this.
I move ordinance
2021.
2021, sorry.
That's okay.
Second.
Okay, the ordinance has been moved by Councilwoman Martian, Marcia. I'm so sorry. Seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Rodriguez. Let's vote. I'm sorry, it's late. That's carried unanimously. So C is 2021-69, a bill for an ordinance making additional appropriations for expenses and liabilities of the city of Longmont for the fiscal year beginning January 1st, 2021. Public hearing and second reading scheduled for November 30th, 2021. Staff report? No. Are there any questions from council? Seeing none, I would open it up for a public hearing. Seeing no one from the public, I would ask for a motion.
I'll move ordinance 2021-69.
Second.
Okay, it has been moved by Councilmember Tim Waters, seconded by Councilwoman Hidalgo Faring. Let's vote. That is carried unanimously. The last one on the second hearing is D 2021-70, a bill for an ordinance amending Section 3.04.885 of the Longmont Municipal Code, adopting an amendment to the City of Longmont Police Employees Pension Plan and Trust Agreement. Public hearing and second reading scheduled for November 30th, 2021. I assume there's no staff report on this. Any questions from council? No. I'm opening up the public hearing, seeing no one in the public. I would ask for a motion from council.
I move ordinance 2021-70.
Okay, the ordinance has been moved by Mayor Pro Tem Rodriguez and seconded by Council Member Waters. Let's vote. And that's carried unanimously. So we'll go to the items removed from consent agenda. Let's go to first C. Is there a presentation on this?
Good evening, Mayor Peck and members of council. Becky Doyle, Executive Director of Consolidated Services. And as usual, cannot talk and pull up slides at the same time. Here we go. Okay, so we pulled items C and D for a quick chat about what those mean. So I'll present on both of them simultaneously. So first, Ordinance 73, which is item C, includes some things that are just sort of cleaning up some language in the water, the water chapter, clarifying that water metering is per structure due to constraints, not necessarily per your residential unit, and that water should not be resold by sub-metering at a higher rate than the retail rate that all folks pay for water by gallon. And then there's a further clarification that multifamily units are to pay utility charges on a per dwelling unit basis. The code as it's written today really bases the charges for the waste management fee, the park and greenway maintenance fee, and the storm drainage rate on the placement of an electric meter. Historically, most multifamily developments have used an electric meter per residential unit, whereas primarily water metering is done by building. So these fees had been connected to that electric meter, as a matter of convenience. But our intention is that, that should be on the basis of the number of units, not the number of electric meters, which, has no nexus to the fee. What we found is that in some newer developments, for convenience or various reasons, that a single electric meter was installed, and thus we had a number of apartments that were not charged the same fees as other apartments within the city. So obviously an equity issue there that we need to address. We first brought this ordinance before you in 2018 to address that issue, and in that process discovered that we were not aware that there were a couple of other places where we had these master meter developments in the city, and that those were in affordable housing providers. So what we've been able to do, through collaboration with LHA and our housing team is bring forth also a companion ordinance 74 that brings those affordable housing operators into the Longmont CARES program, providing some offsets to the fees and minimizing the impact to utility bills for those groups. So that's what these are about. Any questions?
Great, thanks for the explanation.
Yeah.
That's great. Do I have a motion? These have to be moved separately. So I will move 2021-73.
Second.
It has been moved by myself and seconded by Councilwoman Martian. Martian, I did it again. You're going to be the Martian from now on. Sorry. Let's vote. I have to get my screen back. I had an arrow telling me where it was.
Oh, do you want to verbalize your yay or nay? Yay, thank you.
That is passed unanimously.
Second.
It has been moved by Councilor Waters and seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Rodriguez. Let's vote. Carried unanimously. Where are we on this? So that brings us to, I think we're at the end of our meeting here, aren't we? Oh, general business, all right. So I need a motion to recess as the Longmont City Council and convene as the Board of Directors of the Longmont General Improvement District.
So move. Second.
All right, that has been moved by Councilwoman Martin and seconded by Councilwoman Hidalgo Faring. Let's vote. That passes unanimously. So I'm going to read this resolution. It's a resolution of the Board of Directors of the Longmont General Improvement District Number 1, enacting a supplemental budget and making an additional appropriation for the expenses and liabilities of the district for the fiscal year beginning January 1st, 2021. Do we have a staff report on this? No. All right. Do we have any questions from council? No. All right, this has been moved by Councilor Tim Waters, seconded by Councilwoman Martin. Let's vote. And that carried unanimously. Can I have a motion to adjourn as the Board of Directors of the Longmont General Improvement District Number 1 and reconvene as the Longmont City Council? All right, that has been moved by Tim Waters, Councilor Waters, and seconded by Councilor Martin. Let's vote. All right, we need direction for city employee holiday schedule.
Mayor and members of council, Joanne Zias, Chief Human Resources Officer. I wanted to bring this forth as a request for direction as opposed to an ordinance, just so that I could get some guidance in terms of what council would like to see in regard to the Juneteenth holiday. The reason that we brought this forward is because there is a council resolution encouraging the city to celebrate the Juneteenth holiday. And so now that it is a holiday, we were not sure how to treat that on the city holiday schedule for 2022 and beyond. So our question is Juneteenth a holiday that you would like to see us add to the?
Mayor Pro Tem Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mayor Peck. So first, just a quick question in the sense that traditionally, as federal holidays have been added, has the city consistently added those as well to their holiday schedule?
So we have a very similar holiday schedule to the federal schedule. There are two differences. One of them is the previous Columbus Day holiday, which is now Indigenous Peoples Day. We do not have that on our current schedule. We do have the day after Thanksgiving, which is not a federal holiday. So we have two deviations.
Okay, because this question has never come before council in my 4 years, and nobody on council. So
Yeah, if I can add, I think the last time this issue came up was regarding Veterans Day, and the city didn't have Veterans Day as a designated holiday, and so the council ended up putting Veterans Day on that. Remove the day after Thanksgiving. That was an issue that we talked to council about in terms of what we were seeing organizationally as an issue, and so then council put that back on, and so the only add that I'm aware of historically to that is adding Veterans Day. And I think part of this is council, part of why we brought it to is council also directed us to send a letter, Sandy, was it a letter to supporting the creation of Juneteenth as a national holiday. And so we just didn't know how you all wanted us to proceed.
I will just give my opinion real quick in the sense that I think that we should as closely align to general governmental holidays as possible as a local government. So I would be in support of a Juneteenth city holiday as well.
Councilwoman Martin.
Thank you, Mayor Peck. This is a question for city management. I also support doing this for another reason, which is that in previous discussions of staff compensation, that we've been looking for, you know, that perhaps an additional paid day off would be one of the things that could be done, and that we talked about having maybe a floating holiday. I don't remember whether that was enacted.
We have a floating holiday.
Okay. So the question that I have is, can the city afford to enact another day off? Because I'd be for it if it can and against it if it can't.
So, Mayor and members of council, I do believe in January we're going to be coming back with some recommendations in terms of remaining competitive with other employers in the area as well as other governments in the area. I think we probably will need to look at additional time off for employees in general. So I think this probably won't get us there in and of itself, but it will be something that other municipalities are already looking at. I know Fort Collins has enacted it. As we're looking at other municipalities, it's going to be something that if we did not do it, we probably would be behind.
So then we're essentially we're anticipating doing something that would be done anyway next year.
Correct. I think we're all kind of running around the same timing with the exception of Fort Collins, who has gotten ahead of us.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know.
Councilwoman Yarbrough.
Yeah, I just want to say that I agree with the staff taking that holiday as a federal holiday. So I think that's one that should be implemented as well for staff. And yeah, so I agree. I don't know if we need, I think all other federal holidays, those days are paid just like Veterans Day. So I don't see why that would be a question about Juneteenth either. So thank you.
So do I have a motion to, you don't need a motion for this?
No, I was just looking for staff guidance, so what we will do is we will return with a,
Sounds like
with an ordinance.
we're all on board.
Thank you.
So we're going to suspend the Council Rule of Procedure 25 and approve the first quarter 2022 meeting schedule. We went over this meeting schedule last time, so we just need to approve this.
For the trial that we're going to do in the first quarter of 2022, correct?
Right, okay. So do we have direction?
I think this one needs a motion.
Yeah, we need a motion and.
Is there anyone here that would like to make this motion, or shall I? So I move to suspend the Council Rule of Procedure 25 and approve the first quarter 2022 meeting schedule. So it's been moved by me and seconded by Councilwoman Yarbrough. Let's vote. That carried unanimously. So I move to have a special election to fill the vacant at-large council seat.
Second.
So it's been moved by myself, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Rodriguez. Let's vote. We need to speak on this one.
Mayor,
Councilor Waters.
do you have a date that you wanted to set?
That'll be one of my questions.
Okay.
Well, right.
Well, so.
We can discuss the date.
Yeah, well, we have in this, in the council communication and in what we read in the Times Call, there is a challenge here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Picking a date is not quite as easy tonight as it might be. if our county commissioners are not gonna manage this special election, then our only option, my understanding, is to hire a vendor
Outside.
to do that. My second assumption would be that to do that, based on what would be the projected cost? Don?
In the council communication, Mayor Peck and Councilmember Waters, we estimated roughly 250.
Yeah, so my assumption is that would require an RFP
It
and a
does.
competitive bidding process.
It does, absolutely.
And how long it would take to get the RFP, how long giving people or vendors, potential vendors, a chance to bid. I mean, all that would have to be rolled up right into a timeframe. So I'm going to support scheduling an election, but I'd like to have some idea of when we actually would do it, given what it's going to require to line up a vendor. Along with that, I'm really curious if any other council members are wondering why it is that I understand what I read in the paper, I understand what's in the council communication, the county clerks are real focused on redistricting and what it's going to require of them to run a 2022 election with new districts. I'm also aware of the fact that we do this the redistricting happens every 10 years. And it didn't sneak up on anybody. I mean, the maps, I realized, were kind of all over the place, although it would seem to me that there could have been some scenarios given the maps that first came out on the possibilities. And I'm just puzzled why it is that another level of government that manages this for us simply decides we're on our own to do this. In what would be the similar circumstances where the city of Longmont, with an obligation to do something with Boulder County, would simply say, we're too busy. That's our job, but we're too busy to do our job in service to what the county government is doing. Because that's the way it feels to me, like, well, we just can't do two things at the same time. And I want to say, I want to be on record, I think I have serious questions about the responsibilities that are not being met by the county clerk and why it is we get left holding the bag. And I'm wondering if there are any other municipalities in Boulder County that have special elections, and are they left holding the bag as well? And shouldn't we expect more from the county clerk?
Don, can you answer that?
I can attempt. If I may, I don't work for the county, so I can't describe the process exactly. But my understanding is it's a challenge of data. The voter data is going to be manipulated to assign new precincts. There's many layers of your municipal representation, your county representation, your state representation, and all that data has to line back up under the new maps. And so ensuring that data is correct in preparation for the June primary, they have to pull their systems offline and manipulate it and make sure it's right. So my impression was the county clerk was very, what's the proper word? Very apologetic at this scenario. We spoke with both Boulder and Weld counties and received the same answer. They just can't help us this time around. And to the other piece, are there other municipalities? There are, in fact. We've been in conversation with Louisville. I need to follow back up with them. And certainly we've done some talking with vendors to try and see what this world looks like. And they're getting a lot of phone calls. So there's a lot of municipalities across the Front Range and state likely in the same boat.
This has little to do with this particular decision, but in the broader context of the whole process, in our last election cycle, it was easy to assume that it would be likely, given the candidates, that there would be an opening. And for what it's worth, I spoke to Don before I ever declared my candidacy and asked if it was possible that I could resign my Ward 1 seat effective election day, make that statement, and run, and you, with the county commissioner, could stage a special election in the context of the regular election to save Longmont the cost, now $250,000 of a special election? The answer was no, I couldn't do that. Because there wouldn't have been a vacancy declared, and you couldn't schedule that, even though it would be clear what the intent was. And for my, who is that? I don't know if that's a state statute, if that's a charter issue, where I would find that codified. But it seems to me in the bigger picture, that ought to be an option for candidates that would prefer not to put the city in this position, but have no choice unless you're going to resign 6 months early, or whatever it is, 4 months early, which was not something I was willing to do. I felt I owed more to the residents of Ward 1 than to leave that seat vacant. But it would have saved, had I been successful, which I obviously wasn't, but the point is, it could have, depending on how these things play out, saved the city the very situation we're in now, along with the expense that goes with it. I just think wherever that is codified, that deserves some review at some point in time.
So I would like to repeat or make a couple of statements to what you just mentioned. Number one, if they had run back-to-back elections for one of our seats, you're in Ward 3 and I was at large. So it would have been too hard to run 2 elections at the same time. However, I did talk to the mayor of Lone Tree about the same situation, and she said the way that they resolved it was that in their charter, if we came up with this, we can change our charter to say that we can appoint someone for the duration. We don't have that in our charter, and it would have been easier if we could have just appointed, council could have appointed someone to fill the seat until the next election. So that is one way to resolve it without trying to second guess the county's responsibilities or where they are. So I'm just throwing that out there. Are there any other comments? Okay, hold on. Councilwoman Martin.
Thank you, Mayor Peck. I just wanted to say that one thing that we can fix if we have to run an expensive special election is we can run a charter amendment to correct the discrepancy between swearing-in dates for our elections and the county's longer timeline for certifying elections. So we could at least, if we're going to have to pay this much money, since it's an at-large seat and a whole city charter amendment, then we could get a little more bang for our buck. I don't know whether that's a separate motion or whether it's just direction.
We need to, you can make a motion after we've settled this one issue,
Okay.
perhaps. So as far as the date goes, I suppose I can specify a date and we can try to find a vendor within those dates? Or I don't know really how to do that. Can you give some direction?
Mayor, if I might?
Yes.
In the council communication, I showed an example timeline and showed April 5th, 2022, and how that might pan out in terms of nomination petition timeframes and those things. April 5th is a Tuesday. It's a common, first Tuesday in April is common for statutory towns as an election day, so many know that as a day. The timeline, as you can see, is super tight for us, but we thought that that could be done. We didn't want to quote a date, because we wanted you all to have the option to set it. If you felt urgency about doing it sooner, then we would go back to the drawing board and see how we could figure that out. But the RFP takes some time, so that was a gentle suggestion.
Yeah, I think what we're saying is April 5th is doable based on the RFP timeline. If you look at the council memo, we said maybe we could probably get it in late March, but I think April 5th is something that we can say we can definitely hit.
Yeah, I really don't like leaving it out that late to fill this vacancy. Would it be possible to use the April 5th guideline and in the RFP see if there is a vendor that can move that up. Worded in a way that would be our latest that we would want it. How long does an RFP take?
Depends on the bidders.
It depends on that, but no less, at least 2 weeks, but preferably 3.
Mayor Peck, in order to get us all the way through contract, it really does depend on what's going on. I think we could certainly update the council as we go in the process. Don is ready with the scope, so we would release this tomorrow if this is the direction the council gave us. So I think we're ready in that respect. I would say 2 weeks is just posting. So then 2 weeks for evaluation, 2 weeks for contracting. I'd say 6 weeks is about as slim as we go.
Yeah, I was thinking though.
So that would take us into the middle of February. To get the vendor.
To get the vendor, correct.
And part of the RFP is that they would tell you how long it would take them to run this election, so we don't have control. Okay, so I guess I would call on, who's number 4? Councilwoman Hidalgo. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. So really, when I read the packet, I saw, the two options were either we are voting to get a separate vendor that would give us an earlier voting date, or coordinate with Boulder County to have that election in November. My feeling is November's too late. I would vote for option 1, and just if we can get it done as soon as possible, let's do it. But I kind of didn't deduce that you could not really provide us with a specific date until we have a vendor. But if we can have something done in the spring, I think that's a better than waiting until November.
And it sounded like the mail-in ballot would be faster, or is that still up to the vendor? Totally up to the vendor.
Mayor, it would be a mail ballot election. It would be mail ballot.
It would have to be.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm going to amend my motion to state that we hold a special election to fill a vacant at-large seat with November 5th. What was the date? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm stuck on November. That April 5th be the deadline or the date to hold the special election. So, do you want to second my amendment?
I thought it was seconded.
All right.
Earlier, wasn't it? It's just you amended it.
I just amended it. We don't have to second the amendment. All right, that is the motion, and I think you did. Councilwoman Yarbrough, did you second it?
I thought you did, Erin.
Oh, maybe it was me.
It's getting too late, I can't think. Mayor Pro Tem Rodriguez seconded the amended motion. Let's vote. And that carried unanimously. Really need to look at that. So now we have what we've all been waiting for, the City Council Board Liaison appointments for 2021, 2023.
So it goes out on the street tomorrow.
Mayor, I can go to the podium if you like, or whatever's easiest for you.
I don't think we need you there unless you are more comfortable.
This is great.
Okay. Yeah, whatever makes you comfortable, Dawn.
So, Mayor, you have council appointments, external and internal, or city advisory boards.
Yes.
You all provided me with some preferences, your favorites, the ones you are most interested in serving on. All I did was put that into a spreadsheet and try to identify people's first, second, and third choices, and then create some balance. And so there's really, if you agreed with how those fell out kind of naturally in the attachments, then there's just a few discussion points. But if there's other items you'd like to discuss, let me know. And we can start, if it makes sense for you, with the city advisory boards.
Yes, please.
So for Airport Advisory Board, I have Councilmember Martin as serving on that one. It is not the highest choice there, but Councilmember Rodriguez, you'll see, is the competitor on that one. And later he has other higher choices. So if that one's okay with Councilmember Rodriguez and Martin?
Especially considering the external boards that.
Yes, right. So then Art and Public Places, Councilmember Rodriguez indicated an interest, but again, in the interest of balance. My one thought was maybe Mayor Peck, if you wanted to serve on that one, or if Councilmember Rodriguez in fact likes to have lots of boards, or if anybody else was interested in Art and Public Places. That's a question.
I would like to have it.
It's pretty easy.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's so different from transportation.
Different from every one of them.
Mayor Peck or Councilmember Yarbrough's quietly offering services as well? Art and Public Places. Six. Mm-hmm. So I will put Councilmember Yarbrough for now, and then we can come back and amend if needed. The Asset Forfeiture Committee meets quite rarely, if ever, but they do need one person. I thought maybe Mayor Peck would be a logical choice there, just in case there's a called meeting. Only when required, and there are called meetings, so we wouldn't know until there was a meeting. Longmont Public Media would be Councilmember Rodriguez, the only person interested there. Golf Course Advisory, Councilmember Waters. Stop me if we disagree. Historic Preservation, Councilmember Rodriguez. And then the next discussion point is a highly popular library board. Councilmembers Waters, Rodriguez, and Hidalgo Faring all very interested in that board. So as Councilmember Martin frames it, some horse trading ensuing.
Thank you. So I just kind of wanted to speak. So there were a couple of reasons why. So when I was first elected, that was one that had interested me just because of my own background in education, working with the library. So, I just felt like as a liaison, I could offer stuff to the group as well as, just making a positive impact in that respect. And the other piece was looking at time, because I do, my report time for school is 4:15. So anything prior to that is very challenging. So, I've already had to make special arrangements with the youth council to kind of, to have me come in at a later time. But yeah, so that was why I put that as a high interest one for me.
We could also come back to it and see where other boards land, leave that one last, okay? Longmont Housing and Human Services Advisory Board, I suggested Councilmember Yarbrough. It's not the highest choice, but the times would work well, and it was her number 3 choice. Are you okay with that one? Councilmember Martin or Councilmember Rodriguez?
Yeah, so, I wanted it, but I don't have any time conflicts with anything, and I'm really happy with my current assignments. So, go for it.
Very good, thank you. The Longmont Youth Council is the next one. Rodriguez and Hidalgo Faring both ranked that high. Again, balancing, my suggestion was Hidalgo Faring continue to serve on the Youth Council as a liaison, or not on the Youth Council, but as liaison, my apologies. Is that agreeable? Okay. And then Museum Advisory Board, again, a tie between Councilmember Rodriguez and Hidalgo Faring. Looking for some balance there again, although it sounds counterintuitive. Councilmember Hidalgo Faring was my recommendation on that one. Although there may be, 4:30 is the meeting time for that one.
But we're virtual, so I just stay at school. The youth council was the one that I worked with.
Yeah. Okay, good. Okay, is that agreeable to you, Mayor Pro Tem? All right. Neighborhood group leaders, was Councilmember Hidalgo Faring one of your top choices? So my suggestion was Councilmember Hidalgo Faring. The next two where we need someone is the Old Hire Fire and Old Hire Police Pension Boards. Those are called meetings, usually during the day. Need somebody available during the day for when those meetings happen a few times a year. Jim, is that accurate? 4 times a year. Any volunteers?
I have been doing it. I have been doing it because Brian didn't go to them.
Yeah, I'm happy to if you want to vote.
They meet together. So you would do, if you did one, you would do both. Okay. I will put those under Councilmember Waters. Thank you very much. Then Parks and Recreation Advisory Board, Councilmember Waters, that was one of your top choices, as well as Councilmember Rodriguez. Again, looking at balancing, I suggested Waters, but you all are welcome to talk that through.
It's a great board. I loved it, though. I know you did it the first 2 years, and I did the second. So if you'd like it.
Okay. Councilmember Waters it is. Then Planning and Zoning is all Councilmember Rodriguez, all you. And they're happy to have you, I'm quite sure. Senior Citizens Advisory Board, again, looking for balance. Councilmember Martin and Councilmember Rodriguez. So I recommend Councilmember Martin for that one. Continue to serve on that one.
I had it as a 5 because it's a hard time for me. Oh, okay. The 10 to 12.
Very good. A Sustainability Advisory Board was Councilmember Martin's number 1. So that was my recommendation, although Councilmember Rodriguez indicated interest as well. Councilmember Martin? Okay. Transportation Advisory Board, Councilmember Yarborough indicated that was her number 2 choice. And in the balancing, that was my recommendation for that one, and the timing, it's an evening, so hopefully that would work well. Is that good? And then lastly, Water Board, Councilmember Martin ranked that just a little bit higher than Councilmember Rodriguez, and therefore my recommendation was Councilmember Martin. All right. Going quickly to external boards, if we're all okay on those. Oh, we need to go back to the library. Yes, thank you. Thank you, thank you. So Councilmember Waters and Councilmember Hidalgo Faring.
I'm happy to defer. Susie, you want to do that?
Thank you. Very good. That was fast. Thank you. Councilmember Hidalgo Faring it is for Library Board. On the external, there are quite a few that are mayor's role as mayor. Although Mayor Peck did indicate an interest in Denver Regional Council of Governments, so my recommendation was that Mayor Peck serve as the voting alternate for Dr. Cog. And then Councilmember Rodriguez indicated a number 3 interest. I started with Mayor, which took me straight to Dr. Cog. So is that one okay that way as mayor, as an alternate? Okay. My apologies, I'm going to jump back up to the top. So Advanced Longmont Steering Committee was Councilmember Martin's number 1 choice. That was my recommendation. We okay with that? Boulder County Consortium of Cities, we have a voting person and an alternate. So the first choice was Councilmember Martin, and then the alternate would be Hidalgo Faring. Those were both top choices for both of those. Is that okay? Okay. And Boulder County Resource Conservation Advisory Board, Councilmember Hidalgo Faring, that was her number one choice. So that was my recommendation, keeping that one. Thank you. Go ahead.
Don, I have a question.
Yep.
So for the alternate, I only go if Councilmember Martin
Can't go.
can't go.
Correct. If you're an alternate, yes.
Got it. I just wanted to
Yes.
verify.
Thank you, thank you. CML Policy Committee, used to be Councilmember Christensen. Councilmember Rodriguez has indicated interest and was the only willing suspect. Commuting Solutions, also Councilmember Rodriguez indicated an interest, number one. So you get that gig too. Moving on to LDDA, Councilmember Yarbrough, that was her number one, as was Councilmember Rodriguez. My recommendation was Yarbrough, again, trying to rebalance things out. Works for you? Okay. LEDP needs a second liaison, Councilmember Waters, that was his number one. The first person is the mayor, and the second it would be Councilmember Waters, if that works for everybody. Mayor Pro Tem Rodriguez had it as his number two choice, but in keeping things balanced, my recommendation was Councilmember Waters. We're good? Okay. LMAC, Councilmember Waters, again, that was his number two choice.
Part of the problem is that there's a conflict between
Those are at the same, between LMAC and LEDP. Second Monday is correct, Karen? 12 to 1:30? What's your first preference of those two?
I always stay with LEDP.
LEDP, okay. So then, Councilmember Rodriguez, or if anybody else is interested in LMAC, it's noon to 1:30, second Monday of the month. You have a hard time, okay? Mayor Peck? Very good. Thank you for noticing that, Councilmember Waters. Sister cities, a couple of you had a higher score, but balancing, my recommendation was Councilmember Yarbrough. And also because of the time, not during the workday. Is that all right? Okay. The mayor gets her few assignments on mayor type things. Then on North I-25 Coalition, Mayor Pro Tem Rodriguez wanted that one, as well as Northwest Rail Corridor Governments Committee. And then moving down to the end of the road here, Visit Longmont. Councilmember Waters had that as his third choice. That was my recommendation on that one. And then Windy Gap, the last one, Councilmember Martin had that as her second choice, so that was my recommendation there. Waters. And if that all works, I will send everybody your lists. We'll get your calendar invitations. And that concludes that discussion, unless there's anything else. Thank you. Thank you, thank you.
So now we're doing final call for public invited to be heard. I don't see anybody out there, so mayor and council comments. Do we have any? Seeing none, we'll go to city manager Harold.
Comments, Mayor, Council?
Okay, city attorney Eugene.
No comments, Mayor.
Right, can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, it's been moved and seconded, let's all vote. Moved by Councilwoman Martin, seconded by, who are you?
All in favor, say aye.
All in favor, say aye. Thank you. Huh? Motion carries 6-0.